Colorado Territory, 1883. Clara Hayes stood trembling in her father's study as he announced her fate sold like livestock to a stranger 30 miles west. Elias McCade, widowed rancher, 26 years old, 3 motherless children, and a heart still buried with his late wife. Clara was 18, untouched, and terrified. What happened next would become the most whispered about story in Pine Ridge County. Stay with me until the end and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The afternoon light fell through the study window in dusty golden bars, illuminating the worn ledgers and faded maps that decorated her father's domain. Clara Hayes stood perfectly still, her hands clasped so tightly before her that her knuckles had gone white as fresh snow. She could hear every sound with preternatural clarity: the ticking of the mantel clock, the distant lowing of cattle, her own thundering heartbeat. But her father's words seemed to come from somewhere far away, muffled and strange, as though she'd plunged underwater. "The arrangement is made," Thomas Hayes said, not unkindly, but with the flat finality of a man stating an immutable fact. "You'll leave Thursday morning." Clara's lips parted, but no sound emerged. She tried again. "Father, I don't understand. You said you promised I could teach. Miss Brennan said the schoolhouse in Denver—" "Denver." Her father laughed, a short, bitter sound. "With what money, girl? You think dreams fill empty stomachs." He crossed to the window, his broad shoulders blocking the light. Thomas Hayes had once been a prosperous man. The Hayes Ranch had stretched across 2,000 acres of prime Colorado. Grazing land supporting 300 head of cattle and a dozen hands. But the winter of '82 had been merciless, and the spring drought that followed had broken something fundamental in the land and in her father. They'd lost half the herd. The bank in Colorado Springs had come calling, and Thomas Hayes, proud man that he was, had found himself with only one asset left to bargain with: his daughter. "Elias McCade is a good man," her father said, still staring out the window. "Solid. His ranch is thriving, water rights secure, cattle healthy. He needs a wife, a mother for his children." "He needs a servant," Clara whispered, "an unpaid nursemaid." Now Thomas turned and she saw something flash in his eyes. Shame, perhaps, or anger at her for speaking the truth aloud. "You'll have security, a home, children of your own in time. That's more than most women can say." "Most women get to choose." "Most women aren't the daughters of ruined men." The words hung between them like a slap. Clara felt tears prickling behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She'd learned early that tears were currency wasted on her father. Thomas Hayes was a practical man, a rancher's man who measured worth in tangible things: acres, cattle water, grain. Sentiment was for those who could afford it. "I don't even know him," Clara said quietly. "You will." Her father's tone softened slightly. "He's coming for supper tomorrow night. You'll meet then." "How generous, a whole evening to become acquainted with my future husband." "Clara," warning now in his voice. "This isn't some romantic novel. This is survival, his and ours. The marriage contract includes a loan enough to save this ranch to pay off the bank, to keep your mother and brothers fed through next winter. Do you understand what I'm saying?" She understood perfectly. She was being sold. Oh, they'd wrap it in prettier words: arrangement, agreement, beneficial union, but the truth was as stark as winter bones. Her body, her future, her very self, in exchange for her family's survival. "Does Mother know?" Clara asked. Something flickered across her father's weathered face. "She knows what needs to be done." Which meant yes, and meant Catherine Hayes had cried herself sick over it, and meant Clara's 2 younger brothers, 14-year-old James and 11-year-old William, would grow up on land purchased with their sister's freedom. They'd probably never even understand the true cost. "What about what I want?" The words came out smaller than Clara intended the voice of the child she'd been before the world taught her that wanting was a luxury. Her father crossed to her then, and for a moment she thought he might embrace her, might offer some comfort in this impossible situation. Instead, he placed one rough hand on her shoulder, squeezed once, and said, "Want is for the wealthy daughter. We do what we must." He left her there in the study, surrounded by maps of land that would remain in the Hayes name only because she was willing to sacrifice hers. The rest of that day passed in a strange fog. Clara moved through the familiar rooms of the ranch house, the only home she'd ever known, as though seeing them for the first time and the last time simultaneously. The kitchen where she'd learned to bake bread at her mother's side. The parlor where she'd practiced her letters, dreaming of the day she might teach other children to read. The porch where she'd sat on summer evenings watching lightning dance across distant mountains and imagining a future that had looked nothing like this. Her mother found her there as twilight fell, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and burning orange. Catherine Hayes was a small woman, fine-boned and delicate, though years of ranch life had weathered her hands and lined her face. She'd been beautiful once Clara had seen the daguerreotype from her parents' wedding day, but hardship had a way of eroding beauty, like water wore down stone. "I wanted better for you," Catherine said quietly, settling onto the porch step beside her daughter. "I wanted you to choose. To marry for love the way young women in those novels you read always do." Clara said nothing. "What was there to say Elias McCade lost his wife 2 years ago?" her mother continued. "Fever took her sudden and cruel. Left him with 3 babies, the youngest not yet walking. People say he hasn't been the same since, works himself near to death trying to fill the silence. And now he needs fresh help. How convenient." "Clara." "I'm sorry, Mother. I know this isn't your doing." Clara drew her knees up, wrapping her arms around them like a child seeking comfort. "I just thought I thought I'd have more time, more choice, more. Catherine reached over and took her daughter's hand. Her grip was strong despite her small size. A lifetime of ranch work left its mark. "Listen to me. I know this isn't the future you imagined, but Elias McCade is not a cruel man. I've made inquiries. He's fair, hard-working, respected in Pine Ridge. His ranch prospers. His children are said to be sweet-natured. You're describing a horse I might purchase, Mother, not a man I'm to marry." A sad smile crossed Catherine's face. "When I married your father, I barely knew him. 3 weeks of courtship, and most of that chaperoned. I was terrified on my wedding day, certain I'd made a terrible mistake." She paused, staring out at the darkening land. "But we built something together. It wasn't the romance of novels, but it was real, solid. We made a life, Clara. We made you. And now you're sending me away to make another man's life easier." "I'm doing what I must to keep this family alive." Catherine's voice turned fierce. "You think I don't hate this? You think I don't lie awake nights sick with guilt? But your father is drowning child. This ranch, it's his entire identity. If we lose it, it will kill him. Not quickly, but slowly, drinking himself into an early grave while his sons watch. Is that what you want?" "Of course not, but why must it be me who pays the price?" "Because you're the eldest, because you're strong enough to bear it, because—" Her mother's voice cracked. "Because you're my daughter, and I raised you to do what was right, even when it costs everything." They sat together in the gathering darkness, 2 women bound by love and duty, and the cruel mathematics of survival. Finally, Catherine rose, brushing dust from her skirt. "He'll be here tomorrow evening. Wear the blue dress, it brings out your eyes. And Clara—" She paused in the doorway. "Give him a chance. You might be surprised." Clara doubted that very much. Elias McCade arrived precisely at 6 o'clock, driving a well-maintained wagon pulled by 2 sturdy horses. Clara watched from her bedroom window as he climbed down, a tall man, broad-shouldered and lean, moving with the economical grace of someone who never wasted motion. He wore clean work clothes, his dark hair slightly too long, and even from a distance she could see the careful way he'd prepared for this visit. His boots were freshly polished, his shirt pressed. A man going courting, she thought bitterly. Except there would be no courting, just inspection and transaction. "Clara, her mother called up the stairs. "Our guest is here." She took one last look at herself in the small mirror above her washstand. The blue dress fit well cinched at the waist and falling in soft folds to her ankles. She'd braided her honey-colored hair and pinned it in a coronet, her mother's style, elegant and adult. At 18, Clara Hayes stood at the threshold between girlhood and womanhood. After Thursday, that threshold would be permanently crossed. With leaden feet, she descended the stairs. The Hayes family was gathered in the parlor, her parents, her brothers scrubbed and uncomfortable in their Sunday clothes, and Elias McCade, who stood as she entered, his hat in his hands. He was younger than she'd expected. 26, her father had said, but hard work had carved him into something that seemed older. His face was all strong planes and angles weathered by sun and wind. His eyes were gray, the color of storm clouds, and they studied her with an intensity that made her want to look away, but she forced herself to meet his gaze steadily. "Miss Hayes," he said, and his voice was lower than she'd anticipated, rough-edged, but not unpleasant. "It's a pleasure to meet you." "Mr. McCade." She managed a small curtsy, hating how her hands trembled. "Please sit." Her father gestured to the settee playing host, though everyone in the room knew this was no ordinary social call. "Clara, Mr. McCade has come all the way from Pine Ridge. Perhaps you'd pour the coffee?" It was busy work, something to occupy her shaking hands. She moved to the side table where her mother had laid out their best china, the set saved for special occasions with tiny painted roses on each cup. Clara had always loved these cups. After Thursday, she'd never see them again. "One lump or two, Mr. McCade?" she asked, her voice steadier than she felt. "One, thank you. And please call me Elias. We're to be—" He hesitated, seeming to search for the right word. "Well, we're to be family." Family. What a strange word to use for two strangers bound by financial necessity. She handed him the cup, careful not to let their fingers touch, then poured for the rest of the family. The coffee ritual bought her a few minutes before she had to sit before the real conversation had to begin. But eventually, inevitably, she found herself perched on the edge of the settee, her own untouched cup in her lap, while the adults negotiated her future. "The ranch is 40 minutes northwest of Pine Ridge proper," Elias was explaining to her father. 800 acres, mostly grazing land with good water access. I run about 200 head of cattle plus horses. The house is modest but sound 4 bedrooms, a good kitchen, a root cellar. The land's been in my family for 15 years. "And your children?" Catherine asked gently. Clara should know about the children. Something shifted in Elias's expression, a softening, a vulnerability that transformed his stern features. "Henry is 7. Bright boy, loves horses. Lydia's 5, she's quiet, watchful. Takes after her mother that way. And June," his voice roughened, "June is 2. She was only 6 months old when we lost Sarah." An uncomfortable silence fell. Clara's younger brothers shifted in their seats, uncertain how to respond to adult grief. Her father cleared his throat. "It's good the children will have a woman's care again," Thomas said. "That's what I'm hoping." Elias's gray eyes found Clara's. "I'll be honest with you, Miss Hayes. I'm not looking for romance. My late wife Sarah was my childhood sweetheart. What we had. That doesn't come twice in a lifetime, but my children need a mother. They need gentleness and care and the kind of love a man can't provide no matter how hard he tries." "And what do I need?" The words escaped before Clara could stop them. "Or doesn't that matter?" "Clara," her mother gasped, but Elias held up a hand. "No, it's a fair question." He set down his coffee cup and leaned forward, elbows on his knees, meeting her gaze directly. "You need security, a home. The promise that you won't end up like too many women in this territory worked to death on a failing homestead, or worse. I can offer you that. My ranch is profitable. You'd want for nothing, and I promise you this." His voice dropped lower, meant for her alone, despite the others in the room. "I'm a patient man. I won't— That is, I understand this isn't a love match. I won't expect what you're not willing to give." Heat flooded Clara's cheeks. To speak so plainly in front of her parents and brothers about marital intimacy. It was mortifying, but also she realized surprisingly respectful. He was acknowledging the power imbalance, the coercion inherent in their arrangement. He was promising not to force her. "How long will you wait?" she asked quietly. Something flickered in those storm-gray eyes, surprise perhaps that she'd ask so directly. "As long as you need. And if I can't, then we'll have a partnership, a household, a family for my children. That would be enough." Liar, Clara thought, but a kind lie at least. Her father cleared his throat. "Well then, shall we discuss the particulars?" The particulars. Such a delicate word for the sale of a daughter. Clara sat silently while the men negotiated the amount Elias would pay to clear the Hayes family debt, the timeline for the wedding a week, just 7 days to prepare the material goods Clara would bring to her new home. She was inventory being transferred from one ledger to another, her worth calculated in dollars and livestock and acres of land. Only once did Elias look at her during these negotiations, and she saw something in his expression she couldn't quite name. Not pity, she would have hated pity. Perhaps recognition, as though he understood that he was purchasing a person, not a commodity, and was troubled by it despite his need. Small comfort, but comfort nonetheless. Supper was a strained affair. Catherine had prepared a roast with potatoes and early spring greens, but Clara could barely eat. She pushed food around her plate while her brothers peppered Elias with questions about ranching and cattle drives and whether he'd ever fought Indians. He answered patiently yes to ranching, no to drives since his wife's death, and a firm "there's nothing glorious about fighting anyone" to the Indian question, which made Clara like him slightly more despite herself. After supper, as Catherine and Clara cleared the dishes, Elias asked quietly, "Miss Hayes, would you walk with me just in the yard? Your parents can watch from the porch." It wasn't really a question, but Clara nodded anyway, wiping her hands on her apron and following him out into the cool evening air. They walked in silence for a moment, their footsteps crunching on the gravel path that circled the Hayes house. Above them, stars were beginning to emerge in the deepening twilight. Clara had always loved this time of day, the soft transition from light to dark, the way the world seemed to hold its breath. "You're angry," Elias said finally. "You have every right to be." "I'm not angry." Clara wrapped her arms around herself. "I'm terrified." He stopped walking, turning to face her. In the dim light, his features were shadowed harder to read. "Of me. Of everything. Of leaving the only home I've ever known. Of becoming responsible for 3 children I've never met. Of—" She trailed off, unable to articulate the deepest fear of losing herself entirely, of disappearing into someone else's life and needs, until Clara Hayes was nothing but a memory. "I can't promise this will be easy," Elias said quietly. "The ranch is isolated. You'll have neighbors, but they're spread out. The work is hard. The children are grieving and difficult sometimes. And I'm not easy to live with. I work too much. I go days without speaking. I'm told I'm stern and joyless since Sarah died." "You're not exactly selling this arrangement," Clara said with a ghost of bitter humor. A smile flickered across his face, the first she'd seen from him, and it transformed him. For just a moment she glimpsed who he might have been before grief carved him hollow. "I suppose I'm not, but I want you to know what you're walking into. No false promises, no pretending this is something it's not. A business arrangement. A partnership," he corrected gently. "I know you didn't choose this, but I promise you, Clara, may I call you Clara?" She nodded. "I promise you'll be treated with respect. You'll have autonomy over the household. The children will be taught to mind you, and whatever room in the house you choose will be yours alone unless and until you decide otherwise." "Why do you keep emphasizing that?" Clara asked. "The sleeping arrangements." Elias was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was rough with something that might have been shame. "Because I know what people think. That I'm buying a woman to warm my bed and raise my children. That this is about convenience for me. But Sarah—" He stopped, swallowed hard. "Sarah would be ashamed if I treated any woman that way. So I need you to know, your person is your own, always." It was Clara realized the most he could offer her. Not love, not choice, not freedom, but at least basic human dignity. The bar was so low it was underground, yet she found herself pathetically grateful he'd bothered to clear it. "Thank you," she said softly, "for being honest. For not pretending this is something prettier than it is." "It could become something better," Elias said. "Not love, perhaps, but companionship, partnership, a good life built piece by piece. I've seen it happen." "Have you?" Clara challenged. "Or is that what you need to believe to justify this?" He didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was tired. "Both, probably. I'm doing the best I can, Clara. My children are suffering. Henry cries for his mother at night. Lydia has stopped speaking to anyone but me. And June—" His voice cracked. June will never remember her mother. She'll never know the woman who gave her life. Unless you... He stopped himself. I'm sorry, that's not fair, to put that on you. But it was already done. Clara could see it now, the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders like a yoke. 3 motherless children, a grieving widower, a failing ranch operation that needed a woman's touch. Everyone needing something from her and nothing left over for what she needed. Still, the children hadn't asked for any of this either. They were innocent in this transaction, casualties of death and circumstance. If she was going to be sacrificed anyway, perhaps she could at least do some good in the process. What are they like? She asked. Really, not the polite supper table version. What are they actually like? Elias's expression softened again, and she realized this was his weakness, his children. He'd move mountains for them. He'd marry a stranger for them. Whatever else he might be, he was a father who loved his babies. Henry is the serious one. He remembers his mother clearly, and he's appointed himself the family protector. Acts like a little man, far too solemn for 7 years old. He needs to learn how to be a child again. Elias began walking again slowly, and Clara fell into step beside him. Lydia is my shadow. Follows me everywhere, afraid I'll disappear like her mother did. She used to talk constantly. Sarah said she was born asking questions, but now she barely speaks. Just watches everything with these huge dark eyes. And June is all light. Somehow, miraculously, she's happy. She toddles around getting into everything, laughing at birds and flowers and dust motes and sunlight. She keeps us all going, I think, reminds us why we keep waking up each morning. They'd reached the fence line where the Hayes property looked out over darkened fields toward distant mountains. Clara rested her hands on the rough wood rail, staring at a future she could barely imagine. I don't know if I can do this, she whispered. I don't know if I'm strong enough. You're here, aren't you? Elias stood beside her, not touching, respecting that invisible boundary between them. You didn't run. You didn't rage or weep or refuse. You're standing here trying to make the best of an impossible situation. That's strength, Clara. That's resignation. Sometimes those are the same thing. They stood together in the darkness, 2 strangers bound by necessity, while around them the night sounds of the ranch rose and fell, crickets, distant cattle, the soft rustle of wind through new grass. Clara thought about those 3 children waiting in Pine Ridge, Henry carrying too much responsibility, Lydia locked in silence, June, who would never know her real mother. I'll do my best, she said finally. I can't promise more than that, but I'll try. For them. That's all I ask. Elias walked her back to the house where her parents waited on the porch, pretending they hadn't been watching. He shook hands with her father, nodded respectfully to her mother, and climbed into his wagon. Before he released the brake, he looked back at Clara one more time. Thursday morning, then. I'll come at dawn. Pack light, there will be dresses and necessities waiting. Sarah's things, he added quietly, if you're willing to wear them. Otherwise, we can arrange something else. A dead woman's dresses. Perfect. Clara just nodded. She watched his wagon disappear down the long drive, dust rising in the moonlight like ghosts. Then she turned and went inside, climbing the stairs to her room for what would be one of her last nights in this house. 7 days until her life as Clara Hayes ended, and her existence as Mrs. Elias McCade's stepmother, ranch wife. Stranger in a strange land began. 7 days to grieve the future she'd imagined and prepare for the reality ahead. 7 days until everything changed. The week passed too quickly and too slowly. Simultaneously, each hour both racing and dragging. Clara's days became a blur of preparation, sewing, mending, packing the small trunk that would accompany her to her new life. Her mother taught her things she'd need to know: how to make proper ranch meals for hungry men, how to manage a larger household, how to treat childhood ailments. Practical knowledge for her practical future. Her brothers avoided her, unable to process that their sister was leaving. Finally, on her last night, young William crept into her room and climbed onto her bed, tears streaming down his face. "Don't go," he whispered. "Please, Clara. We'll find another way." She held him, this baby brother who wasn't a baby anymore, and felt her own tears finally fall. "There is no other way, Will, but I'll write. Every week, I promise. And you'll visit. We'll still be family. It won't be the same. No, she agreed, stroking his hair. It won't be. But we'll make it work anyway. That's what families do. The night before her wedding, Clara couldn't sleep. She rose in the dark and went downstairs intending to make tea, but found her father already in the kitchen. He sat at the table with a half-empty bottle of whiskey, staring at nothing. "Can't sleep either?" he asked without looking up. "No." He poured a small measure into a second glass and slid it across the table. Clara had never drunk spirits before, but she took it, letting the burn warm her from inside. "I'm sorry, though," her father said finally. "I know those words don't change anything, but I need you to know this is killing me. Selling you like livestock. If there was any other ways, but there isn't," Clara finished. "I know, Father. I understand. Do you—" Now he looked at her and his eyes were red-rimmed. "Do you understand that I wake up every morning wishing I was a better man, a richer man, a man who could give his daughter choices instead of stealing them? You did what you had to do, for the family. That's what I tell myself." He drank directly from the bottle now. "But late at night when I can't sleep, I wonder if I'm just a coward who sacrificed his daughter because he was too weak to lose his land." Clara didn't know how to answer that. Perhaps it was both things, necessity and cowardice, survival and selfishness, all tangled together until you couldn't separate one from the other. "Take care of them," she said instead. "Mother and the boys. Make this mean something." "I will, I swear it." They sat together until dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, a father and daughter saying goodbye to each other and to the relationship they'd had, whatever that had been. Thursday arrived in shades of gray and gold. Clara, dressed in her blue traveling suit, pinned her hair up and packed the last few items. When she came downstairs, her family was gathered. Her mother red-eyed her brothers, subdued her father, looking older than she'd ever seen him. The wagon appeared on the horizon exactly at dawn. Elias McCade had brought a second man with him. His foreman, he explained, to drive the wagon home while he rode horseback alongside. There would be no proper ceremony, just a brief stop at the judge's office in town to sign papers, make everything legal, efficient, practical, loveless. "Are you ready?" Elias asked gently. Clara looked back at the house one last time, memorizing every detail. Then she nodded. Her mother embraced her fiercely, whispering, "Be brave, my girl. Be strong. Be happy if you can." Her brothers hugged her awkwardly. Her father pressed something into her hand, a small leather pouch that clinked with coins. "For yourself," he said gruffly. "Your own money. Never be completely without means." It was something she supposed, a small gesture toward independence. Elias helped her into the wagon, his touch impersonal but gentle. She settled onto the bench seat, her trunk loaded in the back, and felt the finality of the moment settle over her like snow. "Let's go," Elias said quietly to his foreman. The wagon lurched forward. Clara didn't look back again. She couldn't bear to. The ride to town took 2 hours on rutted roads that carved through spring-green countryside. Clara watched the landscape roll past land she'd known all her life, now becoming foreign. She and Elias didn't speak. There seemed to be nothing left to say. The judge's office in Colorado Springs was small and smelled of old paper and tobacco. Judge Morrison was efficient bored even as he processed their marriage license. "Sign here and here. Witnesses? Yes, that's fine. By the power vested in me by the Colorado Territory, I now pronounce you man and wife." He didn't even tell Elias he could kiss the bride. Small mercy. Just like that, Clara Hayes ceased to exist. In her place, Mrs. Elias McCade's stepmother, ranch wife, permanent stranger. They climbed back into the wagon and began the journey to Pine Ridge, to her new life, to 3 children who needed her, to a dead woman's house and a dead woman's dresses and a life built on the ruins of someone else's happiness. Clara sat quietly on the wagon bench, her hands folded in her lap, and watched her old life disappear behind her while her new one loomed ahead like a storm on the horizon. And inside her chest, her heart beat steady and slow, resigned to whatever came next. Because what choice did she have? None at all. The ranch appeared on the horizon just as the afternoon sun began its descent toward the mountains. Clara had been silent for most of the 4-hour journey from Colorado Springs, watching the landscape transform from familiar to foreign with each passing mile. The terrain grew rougher here, more wild, with stands of pine breaking up the grassland and distant peaks still crowned with snow despite the advancing spring. There, Elias said quietly, the first word he'd spoken in over an hour. He pointed toward a cluster of buildings nestled in a valley between two gentle rises. That's home. Home. Such a weighted word for a place she'd never seen, filled with people she didn't know, haunted by a woman whose absence defined everything. As they drew closer, Clara could make out the details. The main house was larger than she'd expected, 2 stories of weathered wood with a wide front porch and stone chimney. Beside it stood a barn painted red but fading, and beyond that a collection of smaller outbuildings she couldn't identify. Fences carved the land into geometric patterns, and she could see dark shapes that must be cattle dotting the distant fields. It was prosperous, she realized. Whatever else Elias McCade might be, he was a successful rancher. The foreman drove the wagon up to the front of the house and set the brake. Before Clara could gather her courage to descend, the front door burst open and a small figure came flying out. Papa's home. The child was tiny, barely more than a toddler, with dark curls bouncing as she ran. She wore a simple dress that had seen better days and no shoes despite the cool spring air. This had to be June, the baby, who would never remember her mother. Elias swung down from his horse and swept the little girl up into his arms, and Clara watched his stern features transform with such pure love that it made her chest ache. This was who he really was, she realized. Not the solemn man conducting a business transaction, but a father who adored his children. "Did you miss me, Junebug?" he asked, pressing a kiss to her curly head. "Missed Papa. Missed. The toddler's voice was bright as bells. Then her dark eyes found Clara still sitting frozen in the wagon, and her expression shifted to curiosity. "Who did—" "This is Clara," Elias said gently. "Remember I told you she's come to live with us, to help take care of you." "Like Mama?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Elias's expression shuddered slightly, that wall going back up. "Like a mama, yes. Can you say hello?" But June had already lost interest, squirming to be put down so she could chase a chicken that had wandered into the yard. Elias let her go with a sigh, then turned to help Clara down from the wagon. His hands on her waist were impersonal, careful gone as soon as her feet touched ground. The front door opened again, and this time 2 more figures emerged, a boy and a girl, both watching with wary eyes. The boy was tall for 7, all gangly limbs and serious expression. His dark hair was neatly combed, his clothes clean but worn. He stood with his hand on his sister's shoulder in a protective gesture that made Clara's heart twist. This was Henry, the little man carrying too much weight. The girl beside him was small and delicate, with her father's gray eyes, and her mother's features. Clara knew this instinctively, though she'd never seen Sarah McCade. Lydia watched Clara with an intensity that was unsettling in one so young, taking in every detail as though memorizing evidence for some future judgment. "Children," Elias called, "come meet Clara." They approached slowly, Henry pulling his sister along. When they reached speaking distance, the boy straightened his shoulders and stuck out his hand with painful formality. "How do you do, ma'am? I'm Henry McCade. This is my sister Lydia." His voice was carefully polite, rehearsed. "We're pleased to make your acquaintance." Clara took his small hand, noting the rough calluses that shouldn't be there on a 7-year-old. "Hello, Henry. You can call me Clara. I'm pleased to meet you too. Papa says you're going to be our new mama." He said it flatly, without emotion, but Clara caught the flicker of something in his eyes, anger maybe, or grief. "I'm going to try to take care of you, Clara said carefully. "But I know I'm not your mama. No one could replace her." Something shifted in Henry's expression. Surprise, perhaps, that she'd acknowledged this truth instead of pretending otherwise. Beside him, Lydia continued her silent observation, and Clara wondered what it would take to coax words from this watchful child. "Why don't you show Clara inside?" Elias suggested. "She's had a long journey. I'm sure she'd like to see the house." Henry nodded dutifully. "Yes, sir. This way, ma'am." He led Clara up the porch steps and through the front door, Lydia trailing behind like a shadow. The interior was dim after the bright afternoon sun, and it took Clara's eyes a moment to adjust. When they did, she found herself standing in a large main room that served as both kitchen and living area. A cast-iron stove dominated one wall with a scarred wooden table and chairs nearby. Simple furniture. A settee, 2 rocking chairs filled the other end of the room near a fireplace. Stairs led up to what she assumed were the bedrooms. It was clean but sparse, with the hollow feeling of a house that had stopped being a home. No curtains on the windows. No rugs on the floor. No small touches that made a place lived in and loved. Just the bones of domesticity waiting for flesh and warmth to bring them back to life. "The kitchen is here," Henry explained, still in that too formal voice. "Papa usually cooks, but Mrs. Brennan from the neighboring ranch comes sometimes to help. The parlor is there. Upstairs are the bedrooms, 4 of them. Papa's is at the end of the hall. Mine and Lydia's are next to each other. June's is the smallest one." "And where will I sleep?" Clara asked, though she dreaded the answer. Henry's face shuddered. "Papa said to show you Mama's room. It's across from his." He pointed up the stairs, then looked away. "Her things are still there. Papa couldn't... He hasn't been able to." "I understand," Clara said softly. "Would you show me—" The boy nodded and started up the stairs, his small shoulders rigid with tension. Clara followed, acutely aware of Lydia behind her, that silent witness to everything. The stairs creaked under their feet. The house was older than it looked from outside, settling into itself. The upstairs hallway was narrow, with 4 doors opening off it just as Henry had described. He stopped before the second door on the left and pushed it open, then stepped back as though afraid to enter. Clara moved past him into what had been Sarah McCade's sanctuary. The room was frozen in time. A 4-poster bed dominated the space, made up with a faded wedding ring quilt. A dresser stood against one wall, its surface still cluttered with small items, a hairbrush, a few pins, a small bottle of rose water. A wardrobe loomed in the corner, and everywhere the faint scent of lavender, as though the woman who'd lived here had only just stepped out and might return any moment. "Papa comes in here sometimes," Henry said quietly from the doorway. "Late at night when he thinks we're sleeping. He just sits in Mama's chair and doesn't do anything." The grief in his young voice made Clara want to gather him close, but she sensed he wouldn't welcome the gesture. Not yet. Not from her, the stranger invading his mother's space. "Your father loved her very much," Clara said. "He still does." There was accusation in the words, a child's fierce loyalty to a ghost. "He'll always love her more than anyone." "I know," Clara said simply. "And that's all right. Love isn't something that runs out or gets used up. There's room for old love and new, well, different kinds of love." She wasn't sure she believed it, but the boy seemed to need to hear it. He studied her for a long moment, then nodded slightly. "I'll let you settle in. Supper's at 6. Papa's strict about mealtimes." He left, pulling Lydia with him, and Clara was alone in the dead woman's room. She moved slowly around the space, touching nothing, just observing. Sarah McCade had been tidy. Everything had its place. She'd been practical. The clothes visible in the partially open wardrobe were sturdy and serviceable. But there were small feminine touches, too. A sampler on the wall, stitched with a Bible verse. A small vase on the windowsill, empty now, but waiting for flowers. A stack of books on the bedside table, the top one marked with a ribbon, as though its reader had just set it down. Clara picked up the book carefully. It was a novel Jane Eyre one she'd read herself, and the ribbon marked a place near the end where Jane returns to Rochester. Sarah McCade had never finished it, never found out how the story ended. Death had interrupted her reading the way it had interrupted everything else. A knock on the doorframe made Clara jump. Elias stood there, hat in his hands, looking uncomfortable in his own house. "I should have cleared this out before you arrived," he said. "It wasn't fair to bring you into this." "It's fine," Clara lied. "No, it's not." He stepped into the room, though his movements were careful, as though he feared disturbing something sacred. "Sarah's clothes, they'll fit you, I think. She was about yourses. The dresses in the wardrobe are everyday wear. There are nicer things in the chest at the foot of the bed. If you'd rather not—" "I'll wear them," Clara interrupted. What choice did she have? "It's practical." "Practical," he echoed with a bitter smile. "That seems to be our watchword, doesn't it?" He moved to the dresser and began gathering the personal items, the hairbrush, the pins, the small bottle of rose water. "I'll put these away. You shouldn't have to live surrounded by her things." "The children might want them," Clara suggested. "Especially Lydia. Something to remember her by." Elias paused, a small silver locket in his palm. "You're right, that's That's thoughtful." He opened the locket, and Clara glimpsed a tiny painted miniature, two figures, a man and woman, young and hopeful. "Our wedding portrait," he said quietly. "She wore this every day." He closed it with a soft click and pocketed it. "I'll give it to Lydia when she's older. Something to pass down." He finished gathering the items, his movements efficient now, as though speed could make this less painful. "Your trunk is being brought up. If you need anything, linens, towels, whatever, ask. What's here is yours now." "What's here was hers," Clara corrected gently. "She's gone." The words were harsh, dragged out of him. "She's been gone 2 years, and these are just things. Things don't matter. The children matter. Making this household work matters. Everything else is just sentimentality we can't afford." He left before Claire could respond, his footsteps heavy on the stairs. She stood alone in Sarah McCade's room. Know her room now, and felt the weight of expectation settle over her like the quilt on the bed. She was supposed to step into a dead woman's life, wear her clothes, mother, her children, run her household, all while the ghost of what had been hung in the air like lavender perfume. Clara moved to the window and looked out over the ranch lands. In the distance, she could see Elias striding toward the barn, his movements angry and tight. Closer in the yard, June played with chickens, while Henry and Lydia sat on the porch steps watching their father and saying nothing. This was her life now. This hollow house, these grieving children, this man who loved a ghost. She could rage against it, weep over it, or she could do what she'd always done, survive it. Clara chose survival. She unpacked her trunk methodically, hanging her few dresses in the wardrobe next to Sarah's, placing her small collection of books on the bedside table next to the dead woman's unfinished novel. She found linens in a chest and made up the bed with fresh sheets, trying not to think about who had last slept here. She washed her face in the basin on the washstand and pinned up her hair, which had come loose during the journey. When the mantel clock downstairs chimed 5:30, she descended to begin her first task as mistress of this house, preparing supper for a family that didn't want her. The kitchen was well stocked, she discovered. Root vegetables in bins, flour and cornmeal in barrels, a good supply of preserved goods. Someone had been maintaining the household adequately, even without a woman's constant presence. She found ham in the cold cellar and potatoes in their bin and set about preparing a simple meal. It felt strange to cook in another woman's kitchen, using her pots and pans, her knives and spoons, but Clara pushed down the discomfort and worked. She was just putting biscuits in the oven when Elias came in through the back door, his boots muddy from the barn. He stopped short when he saw her at the stove, as though surprised to find her there, though where else would she be? "Supper will be ready at 6, Clara said, not looking at him. "I hope ham and potatoes are acceptable. I didn't know what the children liked." "They'll eat what's put before them," Elias said. "I don't allow fussiness." He paused. "Ham and potatoes are fine, thank you." The formality between them was absurd, given that they were now legally married, but neither seemed to know how to bridge the gap. He went to wash up, and Clara focused on her cooking, trying to ignore how her hands shook slightly as she worked. At precisely 6 o'clock, the family gathered at the table. Elias sat at the head, Henry to his right, in what was clearly his established place. Clara served the food, noting how Lydia watched her every movement with those unsettling gray eyes, how Henry kept his gaze fixed on his plate, how June required help cutting her ham into tiny pieces. "Let me," Clara said softly, reaching for June's plate. "I do it," the toddler announced, clutching her fork possessively. "I'm big." "June, mind your manners," Elias said firmly. "Clara is trying to help." "Don't want help, want Papa." The defiance was so normal, so perfectly 2 years old, that Clara almost smiled. Here at least was something she could understand, a child being childish, not weighted down with premature maturity or grief-locked silence. "You are very big," Clara agreed. "But even big girls sometimes need help cutting meat. How about this? You cut what you can, and I'll help with the tough parts." June considered this compromise seriously, then nodded. "Okay, but I do most of it." "Absolutely. You do most of it." It was a small victory, but Clara would take it. She helped June with the difficult cuts, then returned to her own seat and tried to eat. The food was adequate. She was a competent cook, if not inspired, but it stuck in her throat. Across the table, Henry ate mechanically as though it were a chore to be completed. Lydia pushed food around her plate, barely eating. Only June seemed unaffected, chattering about chickens and horses and a butterfly she'd seen. "Henry," Elias said, "tell Clara about your responsibilities." The boy straightened soldier-like. "I help with morning chores before breakfast. Feed the chickens, collect eggs, help Papa with the horses. After breakfast, I do my lessons, reading, and arithmetic. Mama used to teach me, but now I mostly teach myself from her books. Then afternoon chores, then supper, then bed." "That's a lot of work for someone your age," Clara observed. "I'm the oldest. I have to help." There was pride in his voice, but also something desperate, as though he feared that if he stopped working, stopped being useful, he might disappear. "What about time to play?" Clara asked. "To just be 7 years old." Henry looked confused, as though she'd asked him something in a foreign language. "There's work to be done. Papa needs me." Elias shifted uncomfortably. "The boy helps because he wants to. I don't force him." "I wasn't suggesting you did," Clara said carefully. "I just think children should have time to be children." "This is a ranch, not a tea party," Elias said, his tone harder. "Everyone contributes. That's how families survive out here." Clara bit back her reply. This was not the time or place to argue about how much responsibility a 7-year-old should carry, but she filed it away, another thing to address once she had more standing in this household. The meal continued in uncomfortable silence, broken only by June's occasional commentary and the scrape of forks on plates. When everyone had finished, Clara began clearing dishes, but Henry jumped up immediately. "That's my job," he said. "I always help with dishes." "Tonight I'll do them," Clara said. "You've worked enough today." "But, Henry," Elias's voice cut through the boy's protest. "Clara is right. Go take your sister upstairs and help her get ready for bed. I'll be up shortly to say goodnight." Henry looked like he wanted to argue further, but thought better of it. He nodded, took Lydia's hand. The little girl had remained silent through the entire meal, Clara noted with concern, and led her upstairs. June toddled after them, still chattering about her eventful day. Alone with Elias for the first time since they'd arrived, Clara carried dishes to the wash basin and began the process of cleaning up. After a moment, Elias rose and started helping drying what she washed in a rhythm that suggested he'd done this many times before. "They're struggling," he said finally. "The children. With the change. With you being here. I know. Henry especially. He thinks he has to be the man of the house. I've tried to tell him he's just a boy, but you need his help," Clara finished. "And he knows it. So he can't be just a boy, can he?" Elias was quiet for a long moment. "It's not ideal. But this is the reality of our situation. I'm running this ranch mostly alone. My foreman Tom helps, but he's got his own family, his own concerns. I can't afford to hire more hands. So yes, Henry helps more than a 7-year-old probably should. But what's the alternative?" "I don't know yet," Clara admitted. "I'm not criticizing, just observing." "It sounds like criticism." "Because you feel guilty about it," Clara said more sharply than she'd intended. "But I'm not the enemy here, Elias. I'm trying to understand this family so I can help." He set down the dish towel and turned to face her. "You want to know the truth. I'm terrified I'm failing them. Every day I wake up and think Sarah would have known what to do. Sarah would have made this easier. But Sarah's gone, and I'm fumbling around in the dark, trying to keep everyone fed and safe and sane, and most days I'm not sure I'm succeeding at any of it." It was the most honest thing he'd said to her since they'd met, and Clara felt something shift slightly between them. Not warmth exactly, but recognition. They were both in over their heads, both trying desperately not to drown. "Then we'll fumble together," she said quietly. "That's what partnership means, isn't it?" "I suppose it does." He picked up the towel again. "Thank you for supper. It was good. Better than what the children are used to. I'm not much of a cook." "You kept them fed. That's what mattered." They finished the dishes in more comfortable silence, and then Elias excused himself to put the children to bed. Clara heard him upstairs, his low voice reading a story. June's delighted giggles, the soft murmur of goodnight prayers. When he came back down, his face was drawn with exhaustion. "They're settled," he said. "June went right down, she always does. Henry and Lydia took longer. Henry wanted to know if you were staying. I told him yes, you were his stepmother. Now this was your home. He didn't say anything, just nodded and rolled over. And Lydia? Lydia never says anything. The pain in his voice was raw. She used to talk so much. Now it's like she's locked inside herself and I can't find the key. Clara thought of the silent little girl with her watchful eyes. Maybe she just needs time, to trust that I'm not going to disappear like her mother did. Maybe. Or maybe I've already broken something in her that can't be fixed. Children are resilient, Clara said, though she wasn't sure she believed it. They heal. They adapt. I hope you're right. Elias ran a hand through his hair. I should show you how things work here. The household routines, what the children need, but I'm too tired tonight. Can it wait until morning? Of course. Your room, you have everything you need. Yes, it's fine. An awkward pause stretched between them. This was their wedding night, Clara realized with a jolt of panic. Traditionally, there would be expectations, duties, intimacy, but Elias had promised, I'll be sleeping in my own room, he said as though reading her thoughts. I meant what I said, Clara. Your person is your own, always. You don't have to. We don't have to. He trailed off, clearly uncomfortable. Just know that I won't intrude on you, not until or unless you want me to. Thank you, Clara whispered. He nodded, once grabbed a lamp and headed upstairs. Clara heard his door close, and then the house was quiet except for the settling sounds. Old buildings make at night, creaking wood, sighing beams, the whisper of wind around the eaves. She was alone in a strange house on what should have been her wedding night, surrounded by someone else's life, responsible for someone else's children, married to a man she barely knew who loved someone else. Clara walked through the darkened rooms, learning the geography of her new home. She touched surfaces, opened cabinets, ran her hands along walls. This was hers now, for better or worse. These rooms, these children, this complicated situation. She could resist it, fight it, resent it, or she could accept reality and make the best of it. When she finally climbed the stairs to the bedroom that still smelled of lavender, Clara changed into her nightgown. One of Sarah's, she realized, found in the dresser and slipped between sheets that had once covered another woman. She lay in the darkness, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of this house, and waited for sleep that was slow to come. Across the hall, she heard Elias moving around in his room, pacing, it sounded like. Unable to settle. As haunted as she was, though, by different ghosts, tomorrow would begin her real work here. Tomorrow she would try to win over 3 grieving children and run a household and somehow carve out a place for herself in a life that had already been fully formed before she arrived. Tomorrow she would start the impossible task of becoming a mother to children who already had one, even if that one was dead. But tonight Clara just lay in the darkness and let herself grieve for the future she'd lost. The choices that had been stolen the girl she'd been just a week ago, who'd still believed the world might hold magic and romance and dreams come true. That girl was gone now, as thoroughly as if she'd died. In her place was Mrs. Elias McCade, ranch wife, an instant stepmother, practical and pragmatic and utterly alone despite the house full of people around her. Clara closed her eyes and willed herself to sleep. Tomorrow would come soon enough, and with it all the challenges she'd have to face. But for tonight in the darkness, she could let herself be afraid. Just for tonight, Clara woke to the sound of roosters crowing and pale dawn light filtering through curtains. She hadn't noticed the night before thin, faded things that barely blocked the sunrise. For a disorienting moment, she couldn't remember where she was. Then it all came crashing back, the arranged marriage, the long journey, the hollow house, 3 grieving children, and a widower who loved a ghost. Her first morning as Mrs. Elias McCade. She dressed quickly in one of Sarah's work dresses, a simple brown calico that fit well enough, though it hung slightly loose in the bodice. The dead woman had been thinner, Clara realized, worn down by ranch life and childbearing and whatever illness had finally claimed her. Clara braided her hair and pinned it up, studying herself briefly in the small mirror above the washstand. She looked older than 18, she thought. The girl who'd left her father's ranch yesterday was already fading, replaced by this stranger wearing another woman's clothes. Downstairs, she found Elias already in the kitchen, dressed for work, and drinking coffee so strong Clara could smell it from the doorway. He looked up when she entered and something flickered across his face, surprise maybe, or pain. Seeing his late wife's dress on another woman, Clara realized. She should have thought of that. "Good morning," she said quietly. "Morning." His voice was rough with sleep or emotion or both. "Coffee's hot. Cups are in the cabinet above the stove." Clara poured herself a cup and took a cautious sip. It was indeed brutally strong, but the warmth was welcome in the cool morning air. "What time do the children usually wake?" "Henry's already up. He's out doing morning chores with me. Has been since he was 5. There was both pride and regret in Elias's tone. "Lydia usually wakes around 6:30. June sometime after that, though you never know with her. Some mornings she's up with the sun, others she sleeps till 7. And breakfast. 7 o'clock? I'm strict about it, keeps the day organized. Usually it's just porridge or cornmeal mush, maybe eggs if the hens are laying well." He drained his coffee cup and stood. "I need to get back out. Tom's waiting on me to help with the fence repair in the north pasture. Henry knows to come in at 6:30 to wash up for breakfast." "I'll have something ready," Clara promised. Elias nodded and headed for the door, then paused with his hand on the frame. "Clara, about yesterday, about the dress. I should have been clearer. There are newer things in the trunk. Sarah's Sunday dresses, things she wore before the children came, and she softened. You don't have to wear the everyday things if it bothers you." "It doesn't bother me," Clara lied. "It's practical." That word again. Their talisman against sentiment, against feeling too much. Elias nodded once more and left, and Clara was alone in the quiet kitchen with her coffee and her thoughts. She spent the next hour exploring the kitchen more thoroughly, learning where everything was kept, taking inventory of supplies. Whoever had been helping Elias maintain the household had done a decent job, but there were signs of neglect everywhere. Dust in corners, grime on surfaces that needed deep cleaning, a general air of things being adequate but not cared for. A house going through motions rather than being lived in. Clara had just started mixing batter for Johnny cakes when she heard small footsteps on the stairs. Lydia appeared in the kitchen doorway, still in her nightgown, her dark hair tangled from sleep. She stopped when she saw Clara, and for a long moment they just looked at each other. "Good morning, Lydia," Clara said gently. "Did you sleep well?" The little girl didn't answer, just continued her silent observation. Clara had expected this based on what Elias had told her, but it was still unnerving to be studied so intently by a 5-year-old. "I'm making Johnny cakes for breakfast," Clara continued, keeping her voice soft and non-threatening. "Do you like Johnny cakes?" Still nothing. Lydia drifted closer, moving with a ghostly quality that made Clara's heart ache. This child was haunted by more than grief. There was something deeply wounded in those watchful gray eyes. "Would you like to help?" Clara offered. "I could use someone to crack the eggs. That's an important job." For a moment she thought Lydia might refuse, might turn and flee back upstairs. But then the little girl moved closer to the work table, and Clara realized she'd said yes without speaking. She pulled over a chair so Lydia could reach the counter and handed her 2 eggs from the basket. "One at a time," Clara instructed. "Tap it gently on the edge of the bowl, not too hard or it'll shatter everywhere." "Yes, just like that. Perfect." Lydia cracked the first egg with surprising competence, her small fingers carefully separating the shells from the yolk. She looked up at Clara seeking approval, and Clara smiled warmly. "Excellent work. You've done this before, haven't you?" A small nod. The first real communication, Clara realized. Progress, however tiny. They worked together in companionable silence, Lydia helping with the eggs and then stirring the batter while Clara heated the griddle. When Henry came in from his chores dusty and already looking tired. Despite the early hour, he stopped short at the sight of his sister actually participating in kitchen work. "Lydia's helping," he said, as though needing to state the obvious. "She doesn't usually help." "Well, she's an excellent helper," Clara said. "Go wash up. Breakfast is almost ready. Is your father coming in?" "He said he'll eat later. He wants to get the fence repair started." Henry's voice was carefully neutral, but Clara caught the disappointment underneath. The boy wanted his father's attention, his presence, but had learned not to ask for it. "Then it'll be just us," Clara said. "Would you mind waking June?" "He should eat before it gets too late." Henry nodded and headed upstairs. Clara heard his voice overhead, gentle and coaxing, and then June's sleepy protest. When they came back down, the toddler was rubbing her eyes and clutching a worn stuffed rabbit that had seen better days. Don't want to get up, June complained. Want to sleep more. I know, sweetheart, but it's time for breakfast, Clara said. Look, Lydia helped make Johnny cakes. Don't they smell good? June's nose wrinkled as she considered this. With honey? If we have honey, then yes, with honey. We do, Henry volunteered. Mrs. Brennan brought some last week. It's in the cabinet by the preserves. They settled at the table, the three children in their established places, and Clara in what she realized must have been Sarah's seat. It felt presumptuous, intrusive, but there was nowhere else to sit. She served the Johnny cakes with butter and honey, and for a few moments there was only the sound of eating. June dove into her food with toddler enthusiasm, getting honey on her face and hands. Lydia ate slowly, methodically, still watching Clara between bites. Henry wolfed his food down as though fueling himself for another day of work. Henry, Clara said carefully, what lessons do you have planned for today? Reading from the McGuffey Reader and arithmetic problems from the slate. Mama. He stopped, swallowed hard. Before I had regular lessons. Now I just do what I can from her books. Would you like me to teach you? Clara offered. I was planning to become a teacher before. Well, I'd enjoy having lessons with you again. And Lydia, too, if she'd like. Henry considered this seriously. What about your work running the house and taking care of June and everything? I think I can manage both, Clara said. Education is important. Your mother clearly thought so, given the books she left for you. Something shifted in Henry's expression, not quite trust, but perhaps the beginning of it. That would be good. Thank you, ma'am. Clara, she corrected gently. You can call me Clara. All of you can. Papa said we should call you ma'am, Henry said, as a sign of respect. Then Papa and I will need to discuss it, Clara said. But when it's just us, Clara is fine. June, who'd been listening while destroying her Johnny cakes, suddenly announced, I call you Kara. Can't say the L good. That's perfect, Clara assured her. Kara is just fine. After breakfast, Clara set the children to small tasks. Henry had his chores, and then his lessons. Lydia helped clear the table with Clara's guidance. June was instructed to play quietly in the corner with her toys, a small collection of carved wooden animals and the stuffed rabbit. Clara washed dishes, then began the process of truly cleaning the kitchen, scrubbing surfaces that hadn't seen proper attention in far too long. She was elbow-deep in soapy water, attacking the grime behind the stove, when an older woman appeared in the doorway. She was perhaps 50, with iron-gray hair and a weathered face that spoke of a lifetime in harsh country. She carried a basket covered with a cloth and wore an expression of open curiosity. Well now, the woman said, you must be the new Mrs. McCade. I'm Ruth Brennan. My husband owns the ranch 3 miles east. I've been checking in on Elias and the children since Sarah passed. Clara dried her hands on her apron and extended one. Clara McCade. It's nice to meet you, Mrs. Brennan. Ruth's handshake was firm, her assessment frank. You're younger than I expected, and prettier. That'll cause talk in town. I imagine our entire arrangement is causing talk, Clara said evenly. Oh, honey, you have no idea. Ruth set her basket on the table. I brought some bread and a jar of my apple butter. Figured you'd be settling in, might not have time to bake yet. Her eyes swept the kitchen, noting the cleaning in progress. Looks like you're getting after it, though. This place has needed a woman's touch. Thank you for the bread, and for helping Mr. McCade while he was alone. Elias is a proud man, wouldn't ask for help if he was drowning, but those babies needed someone. Ruth's expression softened. How are they doing with the change? Clara glanced toward the parlor where the children were occupied. It's early yet. June seems adaptable. Henry is coping. Lydia hasn't spoken to me. Lydia hasn't spoken to anyone since about 3 months after Sarah died, Ruth said quietly. Broke all our hearts. She used to be the most talkative little thing, questions about everything. Stories about nothing, just constant chatter. Now, she shook her head. Well, maybe having another woman in the house will help. I hope so. Clara hesitated, then asked, what was she like, Sarah? Ruth studied her for a long moment before answering. You sure you want to know most second wives prefer to pretend the first one never existed? I'm wearing her dresses and sleeping in her room, Clara said. Pretending seems pointless. Fair enough. Ruth settled into a chair as though preparing for a long story. Sarah Montgomery, that was her maiden name, she was a beauty. Dark hair, gray eyes like Lydia's, and a laugh that could light up a room. She and Elias grew up together, married young. She was 17, he was 19. Everyone said they were perfect for each other. Clara felt something twist in her chest, but kept her expression neutral. They built this place together, Ruth continued. Started with just a small cabin and grew it into a real ranch. Sarah was a worker, I'll give her that. She could birth a calf, can 100 jars of preserves, and teach her children their letters all in the same day. But the pregnancies took a toll. 3 babies in 6 years, and she was never quite the same after June came. She seemed tired, worn down. What killed her? Claire asked. Elias said fever, but childbed fever specifically, Ruth said bluntly. June was a hard birth, took 2 days. Sarah seemed to recover at first, but then the fever came on. 3 days later, she was gone. Dr. Marsh from Pine Ridge did what he could, but once that fever sets in, she trailed off, shaking her head. Elias blamed himself. Still does, I expect. He was the one who got her with child, after all. The brutal practicality of frontier life, Clara thought. Women died in childbirth with heartbreaking regularity, and the men who survived them carried that guilt like a stone. He must have loved her very much, Claire said softly. Oh, he did. Does really you don't stop loving someone just because they die? Ruth's sharp eyes fixed on Clara. I'm not telling you this to make you feel bad girl, but you should know what you're walking into. Elias McCade isn't available emotionally, not the way a new wife might hope. His heart's in a grave in Pine Ridge. Best you know that up front. I do know, Clara said. This isn't a love match. It's an arrangement. That's what they all say at first. Ruth stood smoothing her skirts. But you're young Clara. Young women have a way of hoping for more than they're offered. Just guard your heart. Don't give it to a man who can't give his in return. After Ruth left, Clara stood in the quiet kitchen and let herself feel the weight of those words. Don't give your heart to a man who can't give his in return. Good advice, certainly. But how did you live with someone, build a life with someone, raise children together, and keep your heart locked away? How did you maintain that careful distance when proximity bred intimacy, whether you wanted it or not? She didn't have answers, so she did what she always did. When emotions threatened, she worked. She finished cleaning the kitchen until it gleamed, then moved on to the parlor. The children watched her warily at first, but as the morning progressed, they seemed to relax slightly. June brought her wooden animals to show Clara, explaining in her limited vocabulary that the horse was named Button and the cow was Bessie. Those are excellent names, Clara said seriously. Did you choose them yourself? June nodded proudly. I'm good at names. Papa says so. I can tell. Clara accepted each animal for inspection, admiring them appropriately while June beamed under the attention. Henry worked on his lessons at the table, occasionally asking Clara questions about words he didn't know or arithmetic problems that confused him. She helped when asked but didn't hover, sensing the boy needed to maintain his independence. And Lydia, still silent, gradually moved closer until she was sitting on the floor near Clara's feet, playing with scraps of fabric Clara had found in a sewing basket. By midday, Clara had made significant progress on the downstairs rooms. They were cleaner, brighter, more lived in than when she'd started. She prepared a simple dinner, cold bread and cheese with Ruth's apple butter, some carrots from the root cellar, and called the children to eat. Should we wait for Papa? Henry asked. He said he'd eat later, Clara reminded him. He's busy with the fence. Henry nodded but looked disappointed. They ate together, the 4 of them, and Clara noticed how the children seemed to need structure, routine. They ate quickly, efficiently, as though meals were just fuel rather than family time. Another thing that had died with their mother, she realized the warmth and connection that turned a meal into something more than just eating. After dinner, Clara brought out the books she'd found in Sarah's collection and began teaching. Henry was advanced for his age, reading well and doing arithmetic that most 8-year-olds would struggle with. Lydia couldn't read yet, but knew her letters and numbers. They worked together at the table, Clara patiently guiding them through lessons while June napped on the settee, thumb in her mouth, and Rabbit clutched close. It felt good, Clara realized. Teaching. Using her mind for something beyond housework. She'd missed the intellectual engagement, the satisfaction of watching someone learn something new. Henry was a sponge absorbing everything she offered. And Lydia, though silent, was clearly intelligent, her eyes lighting up when she successfully spelled a simple word with the letter blocks Clara had found. They were still working when Elias came in around 3 o'clock, dusty and sweating from the day's labor. He stopped in the doorway, taking in the scene Clara at the table with his children books spread before them. Lydia actually participating. Henry focused and engaged June sleeping peacefully nearby. "What's all this?" he asked, but his tone wasn't critical, just curious. "Lessons," Clara said. "Henry and I discussed it this morning. I hope that's acceptable." "More than acceptable." Elias moved closer, looking at Henry's slate. "You're farther along than when I last checked. That's good work, son." Henry glowed under his father's praise, sitting straighter. "Clara's a good teacher. She explained long division in a way that actually makes sense." "Clara," Elias repeated, glancing at her. "Not ma'am." "I told them Clara was fine when it's just us," she said, meeting his gaze steadily. "I thought it might help them feel more comfortable." For a moment she thought he might object, might insist on the formality he'd prescribed. But then he nodded slowly. "All right. If it works better." He looked at his children, really looked at them. Clara thought perhaps seeing them clearly for the first time in a while. "Have you been good for Clara today?" "Yes, Papa," Henry said. "We helped with breakfast and chores and lessons." "Even Lydia helped," Clara added. "She cracked the eggs this morning and worked on her letters this afternoon." Elias's eyes found his younger daughter, and something painful crossed his face. "That's my girl," he said softly. "That's my Liddy." The little girl didn't respond verbally, but she smiled, small and tentative, but a real smile, the first Clara had seen from her. "I need to wash up," Elias said, clearing his throat roughly. "What time is supper?" 6 o'clock as usual, Clara said, "unless you prefer it earlier." "6 is fine, keeps the routine." He started toward the stairs, then paused. "The house looks different, cleaner, brighter somehow." "I've been cleaning all day," Clara admitted. "It needed it." "It did, but," he agreed. "Thank you." Then he was gone. His footsteps heavy on the stairs, and Clara was left wondering if she'd imagined the approval in his voice. The afternoon passed into evening. Clara prepared supper fried chicken she'd found in the cold cellar, more of the potatoes that seemed to be a staple green beans from last year's preserved stock. She set the table carefully, trying to make it feel like a family meal rather than just another chore. When everyone gathered at 6, she was pleased to see that Elias had changed into clean clothes and even combed his hair. "This looks wonderful," he said as he sat down. "It's been a long time since we had a proper supper like this." "It's just chicken and vegetables," Claire said, but she felt a small bloom of pride nonetheless. "It's more than that." Elias looked around the table at his children. "It's family, together, the way it should be." June immediately launched into a detailed accounting of her day, describing every toy she'd played with and every interesting thing she'd seen. Henry contributed occasionally when prompted. Lydia remained quiet but engaged, listening to everything with those watchful eyes. And gradually Clara began to feel like maybe possibly this could work. Not the way she'd imagined her life, but as something real nonetheless. After supper, while Clara cleaned up, Elias played with June in the parlor. Something he clearly didn't do often enough based on the little girl's delighted shrieks. Henry practiced his penmanship at the table. And Lydia, to Clara's surprise, came to stand beside her at the wash basin, picking up a towel and drying the dishes Clara washed. They worked in silence, but it was a comfortable silence now, no longer weighted with suspicion. When they finished, Lydia carefully hung up her towel, and then, before Clara could react, darted forward and hugged her briefly around the waist. It was over in a second, the little girl fleeing before Clara could respond, but the gesture left her breathless. Progress. Real, tangible progress. The bedtime routine was chaos, Clara discovered. June needed to be bathed and dressed in her nightgown, which required 2 people because she had strong opinions about everything and no interest in compliance. Henry was self-sufficient, but still needed someone to check that he'd actually washed behind his ears. And Lydia needed gentle coaxing through each step. By the time all three were in their beds, Clara was exhausted. She sat with June until the toddler's eyes finally closed, stroking her curls and humming a lullaby her own mother had sung. In the next room, she could hear Elias reading to Henry and Lydia something about King Arthur and noble quests. His voice was different when he read to them, softer, more open than the careful control he maintained during the day. When the house finally quieted for the night, Clara found herself alone with Elias in the kitchen once more. He poured them each coffee, and they sat at the table, the day's work done. "You did well today," Elias said, "with the children, with everything." "Thank you." Clara wrapped her hands around the warm cup. "They're good children, just grieving. They're better with you here." He said it reluctantly, as though the admission cost him something. "I hadn't realized how much they needed softness, a woman's presence. I've been so focused on keeping the ranch running that I missed what was happening with them." "You've been doing the best you can," Clara said. "No one expects more than that." Sarah would have. The words came out bitter. She always expected more, better. "She pushed me to be the man she believed I could be." Clara didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. She sipped her coffee and waited. "I'm not going to be that man," Elias continued. "The man she wanted me to be. I tried for a while after she died, but I was just going through motions. Now I'm just surviving, getting through each day, keeping the children alive and the ranch running. That's all I have in me." "Maybe that's enough," Clara said quietly. "Maybe survival is its own kind of strength." He looked at her, then really looked at her, and for the first time she saw something other than grief in his eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or respect. "You're stronger than you look, aren't you?" "I've had to be." "Your father, the arrangement, I've been thinking about it, about what it must have taken for you to agree to this." "I didn't have much choice," Clara said. "No, but you could have fought harder, run away, made a scene. Instead, you came here with dignity and grace, and you're trying to make the best of an impossible situation." He paused. "I'm grateful for that, even if I'm not good at showing it." "You don't have to be grateful," Clara said. "This is a transaction, remember. You're holding up your insecurity, a home, everything you promised. I'm holding up mine. We're even." "Are we?" Elias asked. "Because I'm not sure this is fair to you. You're so young. You should be courting someone your own age, planning a future of your own, choosing, not playing mother to another woman's children and wife to a man who can't." He stopped himself. "I just want you to know that if you need to leave, if this becomes too much, I'll understand. I'll make sure you have enough money to start over somewhere else." Clara stared at him. "Are you trying to get rid of me?" "Already? No. God, no. I want you to know you have options. You're not trapped here." "Yes, I am," Clara said, but without bitterness. "Just stating fact. My father used your money to pay his debts. If I leave, you can demand it back and we'll lose the ranch. My family will lose everything. So no, I'm not trapped physically. I could walk out that door right now, but I'm trapped by duty and debt and responsibility. Just like you are." Elias was quiet for a long moment. Then, "We're quite a pair, aren't we? Both of us trapped by circumstances trying to make the best of it." "At least we're honest about it," Clara said. "That's something." They finished their coffee in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. When Clara finally rose to go to bed, Elias stood as well. "Clara," he said as she reached the stairs. "Thank you. For today. For trying. For being kind to my children." "They're my children now, too," Clara said. "At least that's what we're telling the world. Might as well make it true." She climbed the stairs to the lavender-scented room and prepared for bed. Through the wall, she could hear Elias moving around in his own room, the creak of floorboards, the sound of drawers opening and closing. They were so close, just a wall between them, yet they might as well have been on opposite sides of the territory. As Clara lay in the darkness, she thought about the day, about 3 children gradually accepting her presence, about a man learning to trust again, however slowly, about a house that was beginning to feel less like a tomb and more like a home. It wasn't love. It wasn't romance. It wasn't anything like what she'd dreamed of as a girl reading novels by lamplight. But it was real, and it was hers. And maybe that would be enough. Maybe. The days began to blur together in a rhythm that was both exhausting and oddly comforting. Clara woke before dawn dressed in Sarah's clothes that were becoming familiar now, and prepared breakfast for a household that was learning to depend on her. The children grew more comfortable with each passing day, their wariness gradually softening into something that might eventually become trust. A week passed, then two. Spring deepened into early summer, bringing longer days and warmer weather. The ranch lands exploded with wildflowers, lupines, and Indian paintbrush, and columbines that turned the meadows into tapestries of purple and red and blue. Clara found herself drawn to the beauty despite everything, taking brief moments on the porch in early morning to watch the sun paint the distant mountains gold. It was during one of these quiet moments, 3 weeks after her arrival, that Ruth Brennan appeared again, this time accompanied by 2 other women. Clara watched them approach in a wagon, their Sunday dresses and elaborate bonnets announcing this as a formal social call rather than a neighborly check-in. "Brace yourself," Ruth called out cheerfully as they pulled up. "I've brought the Pine Ridge Welcoming Committee. Clara McCade, meet Martha Henderson and Louise Crawford. Ladies, the new Mrs. McCade." Martha Henderson was perhaps 40, with a pinched face and assessing eyes that swept over Clara like she was livestock at auction. Louise Crawford was younger, maybe 30, pretty in a faded way that suggested hard living had worn down what had once been genuine beauty. "How lovely to finally meet you," Martha said, though her tone suggested it was anything but lovely. "We've heard so much about the arrangement between you and poor Elias." Poor Elias. As though Clara had trapped him rather than been sold to him. Clara straightened her spine and summoned a smile. "How kind of you to visit. Please come in. I'll make tea." The women settled in the parlor, freshly cleaned and considerably more welcoming than it had been when Clara arrived while she prepared tea service. Through the doorway, she could hear their conversation pitched just loud enough to ensure she'd hear every word. "She's younger than I expected," Martha said. "Barely more than a child herself." 18, I heard," Louise replied. "Her father arranged the whole thing to clear his debts, traded her like a horse." "How mercenary," Martha clucked. "And poor dear Elias so desperate for help with those motherless children that he had to resort to. Well, one can hardly blame him, I suppose, but it does seem rather hasty. Sarah's barely cold in her grave." 2 years isn't barely cold," Ruth said firmly. "And watch your tongue, Martha. The girls had a hard enough time without you making it worse." Clara carried in the tea tray with hands that wanted to shake but didn't. She would not give these women the satisfaction of seeing her rattled. She served with perfect courtesy, poured with steady hands, and settled into her chair with the poise her mother had drilled into her. "Tell us about yourself, dear," Martha said, her smile not reaching her eyes. "What was your life like before you came here?" It was a trap, Clara knew. Anything she said would be dissected, analyzed, and reported back to the entire town. "My father owns a ranch near Colorado Springs. I have 2 younger brothers. I had hoped to teach, but circumstances changed those plans." "Circumstances," Louise repeated. Such a delicate way to put it. "Louise, Ruth warned. "I'm just saying what everyone's thinking," Louise defended. "The whole territory is talking about it. A mail-order bride situation right here in Pine Ridge. It's quite scandalous." "I wasn't ordered through the mail," Clara said evenly. "And there's nothing scandalous about a marriage arrangement between 2 families. It's been done for centuries." "But you didn't choose this," Martha pressed. "You were forced into it by your father's debts. That's what people are saying." "People say a lot of things," Clara replied. "Very few of them are accurate, and even fewer are kind." She met Martha's eyes directly. "I married Mr. McCade of my own free will. Whatever circumstances led to that decision are between my family and his." "Well," Martha sat back, clearly disappointed that Clara wasn't going to provide more ammunition for gossip. "I suppose that's admirable, making the best of an unfortunate situation." "There's nothing unfortunate about it," Clara said, surprised to find she almost meant it. "Mr. McCade is a good man. His children are delightful. This is a beautiful ranch. I consider myself quite fortunate." It was a lie, or at least a significant stretching of truth, but Clara would be damned if she'd give these vultures anything to pick at. She smiled sweetly and sipped her tea while the women exchanged glances. The visit dragged on for another hour, filled with thinly veiled criticisms disguised as concern and probing questions about her relationship with Elias, her management of the household, her ability to handle 3 children. Clara answered everything with careful neutrality, revealing nothing of substance. By the time the women finally left, she felt as though she'd fought a battle and barely survived. "Don't let them get to you," Ruth said, lingering after the others had departed. "Martha Henderson is the biggest gossip in 3 counties, and Louise has been bitter ever since her husband left her. They're just jealous." "Jealous?" Clara asked incredulously. "Of what?" "Of you, honey. You're young and pretty, and you landed one of the most eligible widowers in the territory. Elias McCade is a good man with a prosperous ranch. Half the widows and spinsters in Pine Ridge have been circling him like vultures since Sarah died. The fact that he chose an 18-year-old stranger instead of one of them is a bitter pill." "He didn't choose me," Clara said. "It was arranged." "Details." Ruth waved a hand dismissively. "The point is, you're here and they're not. They'll make your life difficult if they can, so don't give them ammunition. Keep your chin up, your house clean, and your husband satisfied, and eventually they'll move on to fresher scandal." After Ruth left, Clara stood on the porch and watched the wagon disappear down the road. "Keep your husband satisfied." The words echoed uncomfortably. She and Elias maintained their careful distance, their polite formality. He slept in his room, she in hers. They worked together to manage the household, but never touched beyond accidental brushes of hands. It was a partnership, not a marriage, despite what the law and the town believed. But people were watching, judging, waiting for them to fail or succeed or provide some entertainment to break up the monotony of frontier life. The pressure of those expectations settled on Clara's shoulders like a yoke. That evening at supper, she mentioned the visit. Elias's expression darkened as she described the women's veiled hostility. "Martha Henderson is a vicious gossip," he said flatly, "and Louise Crawford has been trying to get her hooks into me since 6 months after Sarah died. I'm sorry they came here. Sorry you had to deal with that." "I managed," Clara said, "but I thought you should know what's being said in town." "I don't care what's said in town," Elias replied. "Let them talk. We know the truth of our arrangement." "Do we?" The question escaped before Clara could stop it. "Because I'm not sure I know what this is anymore. Are we business partners, housemates, strangers pretending to be married?" The children, sensing tension, had gone very quiet. Henry stared at his plate. Lydia's eyes were wide. June, mercifully, was too young to understand and continued eating her potatoes with single-minded focus. "We're whatever we need to be," Elias said carefully. "For the children. For the ranch. For survival." "That's not an answer." "It's the only answer I have." His voice was rough with something Clara couldn't identify. "I don't know what you want me to say, Clara. I'm doing the best I can here." "I know you are," Clara said, her anger deflating. Sometimes I wish we could be honest about what this is instead of pretending it's something it's not." "We are being honest. I told you from the beginning what I could and couldn't offer." "You did," Clara agreed. "And I accepted it. I just didn't realize how hard it would be to live in this limbo. Not quite married, not quite not quite a family, but not quite strangers either." Elias was quiet for a long moment, his food forgotten. Finally he said, "What do you need from me, Clara? Tell me, and if I can give it, I will." It was such a simple question, but Clara had no simple answer. What did she need? Affection, companionship, love. She couldn't ask for those things, they weren't part of their agreement. But the loneliness of her position was beginning to wear on her in ways she hadn't anticipated. "I need to know you don't regret this," she said finally, "that you don't resent me for not being her." The confession hung in the air between them. Henry's head came up, his young face troubled. Lydia had stopped eating entirely. Even June had gone still, sensing the weight of adult emotion. "I don't resent you," Elias said, and his voice was gentler than Clara had ever heard it. "You're not Sarah, and I'm not asking you to be. You're Clara, your own person, and you've done more for this family in 3 weeks than I managed in 2 years. If anything, I'm grateful, even if I'm bad at showing it." Something tight in Clara's chest loosened slightly. "Thank you for saying that. I should say it more often. Elias glanced at his children. All of you should hear it. Clara came here to help us, and she's done nothing but work hard and be kind. We owe her our gratitude and our respect. Thank you, Clara, Henry said dutifully, and Lydia nodded in silent agreement. Kara, nice, June added, which made everyone smile despite the lingering tension. The moment passed, and they finished supper in more comfortable silence. But something had shifted between Clara and Elias, a small crack in the careful walls they'd both constructed. Not intimacy exactly, but acknowledgement, recognition, a step towards something more honest than what they'd had before. Later that night, after the children were in bed, Elias found Clara on the porch where she'd gone to escape the close confines of the house. She was sitting on the steps, looking up at a sky so thick with stars it seemed impossible. My mother used to say the stars were holes in the floor of heaven, Clara said without looking at him. Places where the light leaked through. That's a nice thought, Elias said, settling beside her. Not too close, but closer than he'd ever been voluntarily. Sarah believed they were other suns, other worlds. She liked the scientific explanations. You talk about her more easily now, Clara observed. When you first mentioned her, you could barely get the words out. Time helps, and having you here helps strangely enough. It's easier to remember the good things when I'm not drowning in the day-to-day struggle of keeping everything together. He paused. I loved her, Clara. I want you to know that. What we had was real and good, and I'll never stop loving her memory. I know. But, Elias continued, his voice rough with effort, that doesn't mean there's no room for anything else. Different doesn't mean less. It just means different. Clara turned to look at him. Then this complicated man who was trying so hard to be fair in an inherently unfair situation. What are you saying? I'm saying that maybe we could try. To be friends at least. To build something real instead of just going through motions. Not romance, I can't offer you that. But maybe something better than this careful distance we've been maintaining. Friends? Clara repeated, testing the word. It was such a small thing, friendship. Most wives would weep at the offer, but for Clara in her situation, it felt like a lifeline. I think I'd like that. Good. Elias stood, offering his hand to help her up. For the first time, she took it without hesitation, feeling the calluses and strength in his grip. Then tomorrow, if you're willing, I'd like to show you the ranch properly, the full extent of it, what we raise, how everything works. If you're going to be part of this operation, you should understand it. I'd like that very much. He squeezed her hand once before releasing it, then headed inside. Clara stayed on the porch a few minutes longer, watching the stars and thinking about small victories. Friendship wasn't love, but it was something, a foundation they could build on if they were both willing to try. The next morning dawned clear and bright, perfect for riding. Elias saddled 2 horses, a gentle mare named Rosie for Clara, and his own gelding, a sturdy bay called Jack. Henry begged to come along, but Elias was firm. You're needed here to watch your sisters, he told the boy. This is important work, keeping June out of trouble and making sure Lydia has company. Can you handle that responsibility? Henry straightened, visibly pleased at being trusted. Yes, sir. I won't let you down. They rode out across lands that seemed to stretch forever, Elias pointing out landmarks and explaining the ranch's operations. He showed her the north pasture where the main herd grazed the creek that provided year-round water, the line shacks where hands would stay during roundup season. He talked about breeding stock and market prices, about the delicate balance of weather and luck that determined a rancher's fortune. Clara listened, asked questions, and tried to absorb it all. She'd grown up on a ranch, but she'd never been taught the business side of it. That was men's work, her father had always said. Now she was grateful for Elias's willingness to share this knowledge, to treat her as a partner rather than just a housekeeper. They stopped at midday by a small pond fed by the creek, letting the horses drink while they shared the lunch Clara had packed. It was peaceful here, away from the house, and its ghost just 2 people in a vast landscape of grass and sky. This is beautiful, Clara said, meaning it. I can see why you love it. Sarah and I used to come here, Elias said. When we were courting before we married. We'd ride out and spend whole afternoons just talking, making plans for the future. He smiled, but it was tinged with sadness. She wanted to build a bigger house, have 6 children, plant an orchard. So many dreams. You could still do those things, Clara said carefully. The orchard, at least. Maybe the bigger house eventually. Maybe. He was quiet for a moment, then asked, "What were your dreams?" Before all this, Clara considered lying, saying something safe and expected, but they'd agreed to try friendship, and friendship required honesty. I wanted to teach. I wanted to help children learn to read, to open their minds to possibilities beyond just survival. I wanted to make a difference, however small. You are teaching, Elias pointed out. Henry's progressed more in 3 weeks with you than in 6 months on his own. It's not the same as having my own schoolhouse, my own students. She plucked at the grass. But you're right, it's something, more than I might have had otherwise. Do you regret it? He asked. Coming here, agreeing to this arrangement. Clara thought about it honestly. Did she regret it? She missed her family, her old life, the future she'd imagined, but she couldn't truthfully say she regretted her choice because it hadn't really been a choice, and regret was wasted on inevitability. No, she said finally, I don't regret it. I hate how it came about, hate that I didn't have a choice. But the life I'm building here with the children, with the ranch, even with you, it's not what I imagined, but it's real. It matters. That's more than many people can say. Elias studied her with an intensity that made Clara self-conscious. You're remarkable, you know, that most women in your position would be bitter, resentful, but you just adapt, endure, make the best of things. What else can I do? Clara asked. Rail against reality. Weep over what I've lost. That won't change anything. This is my life now. I can either make it bearable or make it miserable. I choose bearable. I'm glad you're here, Elias said simply. I know I don't say it enough, but I am. The children are better. The house is better. I'm better, or at least less of a mess. You've brought light back into a very dark place. The compliment made Clara's throat tight. Thank you. That means more than you know. They rode back in companionable silence, and when they reached the house, Clara felt something had fundamentally shifted. They weren't just occupants of the same space anymore. They were allies, partners working toward the same goals. It wasn't romance, but it was connection, and that was its own kind of gift. The following weeks brought a deepening of that connection. Elias began coming in for dinner instead of eating alone in the barn. He stayed after the children went to bed, and he and Clara would talk about everything and nothing. Ranch business, childhood memories, books they'd read, dreams they'd abandoned. Slowly, carefully, they were building something neither had expected. The children thrived in this new atmosphere. Henry began to laugh more, his shoulders losing some of their constant tension. June was her usual sunny self, but seemed to sense the improved mood in the household, and Lydia miraculously began to speak again. It started small. One morning at breakfast, she whispered, "Please," when Clara offered her more porridge. Clara nearly dropped the pot in shock, but managed to keep her expression neutral and simply served the child, not making a fuss that might scare her back into silence. That evening, Lydia said thank you when Clara helped her into her nightgown. And the next day she asked, where, when she couldn't find her favorite hair ribbon. Single words, carefully chosen, but words nonetheless. Elias wept when Clara told him. Actually wept standing in the kitchen with tears running down his weathered face, while Clara awkwardly patted his shoulder and assured him it was going to be all right. I thought I'd lost her, he said roughly. I thought whatever was broken couldn't be fixed, but you fixed it. You brought her back. She brought herself back, Clara corrected. She just needed time, and to feel safe again. Because of you, because you made this house feel safe. He wiped his eyes, embarrassed. I'm sorry. I don't usually... It's all right, Clara assured him. She's your daughter. You're allowed to have feelings about her healing. Something in Elias's expression shifted, then became more intent. He reached out and tucked a loose strand of hair behind Clara's ear, his touch gentle and deliberate. You're extraordinary, Clara McCade. The moment stretched between them, charged with possibility. Clara's breath caught. Elias's hand lingered near her face, and she thought just for a moment that he might kiss her, that the careful distance they'd maintained might finally dissolve into something warmer, more human. But then June called from upstairs, Kara need help, and the spell broke. Elias stepped back, his expression shuddering, and Clara hurried to tend to the toddler's needs, her heart beating too fast and her thoughts in chaos. After that night, something new entered their dynamic awareness. Physical awareness of each other in a way they'd both carefully avoided before. Accidental touches seemed to linger. Glances held a beat too long. The air between them felt charged with possibility neither quite knew how to address. Clara found herself noticing things about Elias she'd previously overlooked. The way his shoulders filled out his work shirts, the rare smile that transformed his stern features, the gentleness in his hands when he handled the children or the animals. She caught herself watching him sometimes and had to force her attention elsewhere. And Elias, for his part, seemed newly aware of Clara. His eyes followed her movements around the room. He found excuses to be near her, helping with dishes, checking on her when she worked in the garden. She'd started lingering in conversations longer than necessary. It was Ruth Brennan who finally called Clara out on it, cornering her at the general store in Pine Ridge during Clara's first solo trip to town. "Good heavens, girl," Ruth said, examining Clara's flushed face with knowing eyes. "You've gone and done it, haven't you?" "Done what?" Clara asked, though she knew exactly what Ruth meant. "Fallen for him, for Elias." Ruth shook her head. "I warned you to guard your heart." "I haven't fallen for anyone," Clara protested. "We're just getting along better, building a partnership." "That blush says otherwise." Ruth's expression softened. "Listen, honey, I'm not judging. You're young and living in close quarters with a man who, despite his grief, is still flesh and blood. It's natural to develop feelings. Just be careful. Make sure he's ready for what you're offering before you give your heart completely." "He's not ready," Clara said quietly. "He still loves her, Sarah." "Of course he does. But loving someone who's gone and loving someone who's here aren't mutually exclusive." Ruth squeezed Clara's hand. "Just talk to him. Be honest. You'd be surprised what can grow when people actually communicate." Clara carried Ruth's words home with her along with her purchases. That night, after the children were in bed, she found Elias on the porch again. Their meeting place, she realized, where difficult conversations happened under the cover of darkness. "We need to talk," she said, settling beside him. "That sounds ominous." But Elias smiled slightly, taking the sting out of his words. "Things have changed between us," Clara said carefully. "You must have noticed the way we are with each other now versus a month ago." "I've noticed." And Clara prompted when he didn't elaborate. Elias was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the dark landscape. "And I don't know what to do about it. I told you from the beginning what I could offer: friendship, partnership, respect, but not more, not love, because that belongs to Sarah." "All of it?" Clara asked. "Every bit of your capacity for love is locked in a grave. It's not that simple." "Then explain it to me," Clara said. "Because I'm trying to understand Elias. I'm trying to be patient and reasonable and accept the limitations you've set. But I'm 18 years old and living with a man I'm married to in every legal sense, and yes, I've developed feelings I probably shouldn't have. So help me understand how this is supposed to work." Elias turned to face her, and even in the dim light she could see the torment in his expression. "I'm terrified," he admitted. "Of letting someone in again. Of building something and then losing it. When Sarah died, it nearly destroyed me. I barely functioned for months. If it hadn't been for the children needing me, I might not have survived it. I can't," his voice cracked. "I can't go through that again." Understanding bloomed in Clara's chest. "So you keep everyone at arm's length, even me, even your own children sometimes. Because if you don't love too much, it won't hurt too much if you lose them." "I know it's not rational." "It's not rational and it's not working," Clara interrupted gently. "Elias, you can't live your whole life in fear of loss. Life is loss. That's the price of love. But it's also joy and connection and all the things that make living worthwhile." "You sound very wise for 18. "I sound like someone who's lost things too," Clara said. "My future, my choices, my family. But I'm still here, still trying, still open to whatever comes next." She took a breath. "I'm not asking you to love me. I'm not even asking you to stop loving Sarah. I'm just asking you to leave the door open to the possibility that maybe someday there could be room for both." Elias reached for her hand, threading his fingers through hers. You deserve better than a man with a divided heart. Maybe, Clara agreed, but you're the man I have. And despite everything, despite the circumstances and the grief and the complications, I think we could build something good here. Real. If you just let yourself try. I don't know if I know how anymore. Then we'll figure it out together, Clara said. One day at a time. No pressure, no expectations, just trying. Elias pulled her closer and Clara let herself lean against his shoulder. They sat like that for a long time, holding hands under the stars, not speaking, just being together. It wasn't a declaration of love or a promise of forever, but it was something a crack in the armor, a small step forward. And for now, Clara thought that would be enough. Summer arrived in full force, transforming the Colorado landscape into something almost unbearably beautiful. The wildflowers gave way to ripening grasses that swayed like ocean waves in the constant wind. The children grew brown from sun and healthy from regular meals and the stability Clara had brought to their lives. And slowly, cautiously, the McCade household began to feel less like a collection of wounded individuals and more like an actual family. Clara noticed the changes in small ways. Henry began bringing her wildflowers he'd picked during his chores, presenting them with elaborate formality that made her heart ache. Lydia's vocabulary expanded daily, moving from single words to full sentences, though she still chose her words carefully and rarely spoke to anyone but Clara and Elias. And June had taken to following Clara everywhere, chattering constantly about everything and nothing, her small hand perpetually reaching for Clara's skirt. "Mama," June said one morning at breakfast, and the word fell into the room like a stone into still water. Everyone froze. Henry's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. Lydia's eyes went huge. Elias looked like he'd been struck, and Clara felt her heart simultaneously soar and break because the little girl couldn't remember that she'd had another mama before. "Cara, mama," June insisted, patting Clara's arm. "My mama." "I'm Clara," Clara said gently, acutely aware of every eye on her. "Remember, Cara." "Mama Cara." June compromised and went back to eating her porridge as though she hadn't just detonated an emotional bomb. After breakfast, Elias found Clara in the kitchen, washing dishes with shaking hands. He didn't say anything at first, just picked up the drying towel and worked silently beside her. Finally, he spoke. "Sarah would have wanted that," he said quietly. "For June to have a mother, even if it's not her." "I don't want to replace her," Clara said. "Especially not in the children's memories." "You're not replacing her. You're filling a space she left empty." Elias set down the towel and turned to face her. "Henry and Lydia remember their mother. They always will. But June, she needs someone to call Mama. And you've been that for her. You've been that for all of them." "It doesn't feel right," Clara confessed. "Accepting that name when we're not what?" Elias asked. "Really married, really a family." He moved closer, close enough that Clara could smell soap and leather and the outdoors on him. "Clara, we sleep in separate rooms and we don't have the kind of marriage most people would recognize, but we're more married than half the couples I know. We're partners, we're raising children together, we're building a life together. If that's not marriage, I don't know what is." "But you don't love me," Clara said, the words escaping before she could stop them. "You're still in love with Sarah." "I do love Sarah," Elias agreed. "I probably always will. But Clara..." He reached up and cupped her face in his work-roughened hands, forcing her to meet his eyes. "That doesn't mean I don't have feelings for you. Different feelings, maybe not the same as what I had with her, but real nonetheless. You're brave and kind and patient. You came into an impossible situation and made it work. You brought life back into this house, warmth back into my children. You brought..." His voice roughened. "You brought light back into places I thought would be dark forever." "Elias," Clara whispered, her heart hammering. "I'm not good with words," he continued, "and I'm probably making a mess of this. But I want you to know you're not just convenient. You're not just the woman who agreed to help me. You're Clara, and you matter. To me. To this family. More than I know how to say." He kissed her, then soft and tentative, asking permission even as he took it. Clara's eyes fluttered closed, and she let herself sink into the kiss, into the warmth of his hands on her face, into the possibility of something more than the careful distance they'd maintained. It was gentle and sweet, and nothing like the passionate embraces she'd read about in novels, but it was real, and it was theirs, and it was everything. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing slightly harder, Elias rested his forehead against hers. I can't promise you romance or poetry or grand gestures, but I can promise you partnership and respect and whatever pieces of my heart aren't in a grave. If that's enough, if you're willing to build on that, then I'd like to try, to really try, to make this marriage real in every sense. Clara's breath caught. Are you saying... I'm saying that separate bedrooms don't make sense anymore. That I want you as my wife in truth, not just on paper. That I'm ready, or at least I'm willing to try to be ready for something more. He pulled back slightly to look at her. But only if you want it too. I won't pressure you. Won't expect anything you're not ready to give. Clara thought about the girl she'd been 3 months ago, terrified and resentful being sold to a stranger. That girl had wanted choices, autonomy, freedom to determine her own future. But the woman she'd become understood that sometimes the life you didn't choose could still be good, could still be worth choosing retroactively. I want to try, she said softly. I'm scared, and I don't know what I'm doing, but I want to try. Elias smiled, a real smile, broad and genuine and transformative. Then we'll figure it out together, just like everything else. He kissed her again, less tentatively this time, and Clara felt something settle into place inside her. This wasn't the fairy tale she'd imagined as a girl, but it was real and honest and built on a foundation of mutual respect. That was worth more than any fantasy. They were interrupted by Henry's voice calling from outside. Papa Clara, come quick. Something's wrong with Rosie. They rushed out to find Henry standing by the barn, his face pale with worry. Inside, the gentle mare Clara had been riding lay on her side in the straw, her flanks heaving, eyes rolling white with distress. She's foaling, Elias said immediately, dropping to his knees beside the horse. But something's wrong. She's been at it too long. He ran his hands over her swollen belly, his expression grim. The foal's breech. I need to turn it or we'll lose them both. What can I do? Clara asked, pushing aside her squeamishness. Keep her calm. Talk to her. Henry, fetch Tom. Tell him to bring the medical kit from the tack room. And get fresh water and clean towels. Elias rolled up his sleeves, his face set with determination. Clara, I need you to hold her head. Keep her still while I work. Clara knelt in the straw, cradling the mare's head in her lap, stroking the velvety nose, and murmuring nonsense words of comfort. Rosie's eyes were wild with pain and fear, and Clara's heart ached for the animal's distress. Behind her, she could hear Elias working his voice low and soothing as he talked the mare through what he was doing. Tom arrived with the medical supplies, and together he and Elias worked to reposition the foal. It was brutal, messy work, and more than once Clara thought they were going to lose both animals. But Elias was patient and skilled, his hands sure despite the difficulty, and slowly, agonizingly slowly, he managed to turn the foal into the correct position. That's it, girl, he murmured. That's it. Now push. You can do this. With one final tremendous effort, Rosie delivered a tiny, perfect foal onto the straw. For a terrible moment it lay still, and Clara's heart sank. But then Elias cleared its airways and rubbed it vigorously with a towel, and the foal took its first shuddering breath. We did it, Elias said, his voice hoarse with emotion and exhaustion. We saved them both. Clara looked at him kneeling in the straw covered in birth fluids and sweat, his face alight with joy, and something fierce and tender swelled in her chest. This man who worked so hard, who loved his children and his animals and his land with such fierce dedication, who was learning to open his heart again despite his fear, this man was her husband, and she was falling in love with him. The realization should have terrified her. Instead, it felt like coming home. Over the next few weeks, everything shifted. Elias began courting Clara the way he might have if they'd met under normal circumstances, bringing her flowers from the meadow, asking about her day with genuine interest, finding small ways to make her smile. He held her hand when they sat on the porch in the evenings. He kissed her good night before they parted for their separate bedrooms, though those kisses grew longer and more heated as time passed. And Clara let herself hope. Hope that this arranged marriage might become something real. Hope that the heart she'd guarded so carefully might be safe in Elias's keeping. Hope that she might truly belong here not just as a convenience, but as someone valued and wanted. On a hot evening in late July, Clara was finishing the supper dishes when Elias came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. It was a gesture of casual intimacy they'd only recently begun sharing, and it still made Clara's heart race. "Leave those," he said quietly. "They'll keep till morning." "But, Clara..." He turned her to face him, his eyes intense. "I've been patient. I've been cautious. I've been so careful not to push you, not to expect more than you were ready to give. But I can't wait anymore. I need you to know, I need to show you..." He stopped, seeming to struggle for words. "You're my wife. I want you to be my wife in every way. If you're ready. If you want that too." Clara's breath caught. She knew what he was asking, what he was offering. The final barrier between them, the last line they hadn't crossed. Her heart hammered fear and anticipation tangling together, but underneath both was certainty. She trusted this man. She'd built a life with him. And yes, she wanted him, wanted to make this marriage real in the most intimate way. "I'm ready," she whispered. Elias kissed her deeply, thoroughly, his hands sliding into her hair and pulling her close. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he took her hand and led her upstairs. They passed the children's rooms, all three quiet. The baby's long since asleep, and Clara expected Elias to lead her to her room, the one that still held traces of Sarah's lavender perfume. But instead he opened the door to his own room, larger than hers, more Spartan, clearly a masculine space, with its plain furniture and lack of decoration. "Not there," he said, understanding her unspoken question. "That was her room. This is mine, ours, if you'll have me." It was the last barrier falling, Clara realized. He wasn't asking her to replace Sarah or to inhabit Sarah's space. He was inviting her into his own life, making room for her where there had only been solitude and grief. "Yes," she said simply. What followed was tender and awkward, and nothing like the clinical explanations Clara's mother had given her before the wedding. Elias was patient, careful with her innocence, murmuring reassurances and asking if she was all right more times than she could count. There was some pain, she'd been warned about that, but also closeness and intimacy, and a sense of profound connection that Clara hadn't anticipated. Afterward, lying in Elias's arms with her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat slow to normal, Clara felt something fundamental shift. They were truly married now, truly bound. For better or worse, this was her life, her man, her future. "Thank you," Elias said into the darkness, his hand stroking her hair. "For what?" "For giving me a chance. For not giving up on me when I was too broken to meet you halfway. For bringing me back to life." He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "I know I'm not easy. I know I'm still learning how to do this. But Clara, I'm so grateful you're here. You're the best thing that's happened to this family in a very long time." "I love you." Clara said the words escaping before she could second-guess them. "I know you didn't ask for that, and I know you can't say it back, but I need you to know. I love you, Elias McCade." She felt him go still beneath her, and for a terrible moment she thought she'd ruined everything by speaking too soon, asking for too much. But then his arms tightened around her, and his voice, rough with emotion, said, "I love you too. It's different from what I felt for Sarah, you were right about that. But it's real, Clara. What I feel for you is real, and I do love you. Maybe not in the same way, but in a way that's ours. That's just for you." Clara turned her face into his chest and let the tears come, not sad tears, but tears of relief and joy and the overwhelming rightness of this moment. She'd been so afraid she'd never be more than convenient, never be valued for herself, never truly belong in this life she'd been thrust into. But here in Elias's arms, being told she was loved, she finally understood that home wasn't a place. It was people. It was choosing each other day after day, building something real from imperfect pieces. From that night forward, Clara slept in Elias's room. They moved her belongings over piece by piece, and gradually the space transformed from a masculine cave into a couple's sanctuary. Clara added curtains and a braided rug and small touches that made it feel lived in and loved. And Sarah's old room was finally closed off, saved for the future, perhaps for visiting family or another child, if God blessed them with one, or just as a guest room no longer waited with ghosts. The children noticed the change immediately, of course. Henry was old enough to understand what it meant when Clara moved into Papa's room, and though he said nothing directly, he seemed pleased. Lydia, ever observant, simply nodded as though this was the natural order of things. And June, who'd been calling Clara Mama for months now, just beamed and declared, "Mama stays with Papa now, like real mamas and Papa. Like real mamas and papas." The innocent words held such weight, such perfect truth. That's what they were now, a real family built from broken pieces and healed by time and patience and love. In August, Clara's family came to visit her parents and two brothers making the journey from Colorado Springs. It was Clara's first time seeing them since her wedding day, and she was nervous about their reaction to the life she'd built. Would they see her happiness, or would they only see the arrangement that had brought her here, the sacrifice she'd made for their survival? Thomas Hayes stood on the porch looking over the prosperous ranch with assessing eyes while Catherine gathered Clara into a fierce embrace. "Let me look at you," her mother said, holding Clara at arm's length. "You're different, older somehow, but—" She paused, studying her daughter's face. "You're happy. I can see it in your eyes." "I am," Clara said, surprised to realize how much she meant it. "It wasn't easy at first, but we made it work. We built something good." Her father joined them, his expression difficult to read. "The ranch looks prosperous. McCade has a solid operation here." "He does," Clara agreed, keeping her voice neutral. Her relationship with her father was still complicated. She'd forgiven him, but forgetting was harder. "I'm sorry," Thomas said abruptly. "I need you to know that. What I did selling you to solve my own problems, it was the act of a desperate man, but that doesn't make it right. I've regretted it every day since you left." Clara hadn't expected an apology. For a moment, she didn't know what to say. Then, "You did what you thought you had to do. I understand that now, and it turned out—" She glanced back at the house where she could see Elias playing with the children in the yard. "It turned out better than either of us could have hoped." "You love him," her mother observed. "The rancher. You've fallen in love with him." "I have," Clara admitted. "And he loves me. We're making this work, Mama. We're making it real." The visit went better than Clara had feared. Her brothers were enchanted with the ranch, following Elias around and pestering him with questions about cattle and horses. Her parents relaxed as they saw how comfortable Clara was here, how naturally she fit into this life. And when the Hayes family departed 3 days later, Catherine pulled Clara aside for one final conversation. "I'm proud of you," she said. "You could have been bitter. You could have made everyone miserable. Instead, you made a home. You made a family. That takes strength, Clara, more strength than most people have." "I learned it from you," Clara said. "You showed me how to survive impossible situations with grace." "No, darling. You showed yourself." Catherine kissed her daughter's forehead. "Be happy. That's all I ever wanted for you." As Clara watched her family's wagon disappear down the road, Elias came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist. "You all right?" "Better than all right," Clara said, leaning back against him. "I have 2 families now, the one I was born into and the one I chose. Or the one that chose me. Either way, I'm luckier than I deserve." "We're the lucky ones," Elias countered. "All of us. The children and me, we were drowning before you came. You saved us, Clara. You saved all of us." That autumn, the ranch thrived. The cattle were healthy, the harvest was good, and Elias's careful management meant they had a profitable year. He took Clara to town to buy fabric for new dresses. Not Sarah's old clothes, but things made specifically for her in colors she chose. He bought books for the children's education and toys for June. He even commissioned a photographer to take a family portrait. The day of the photograph, Clara dressed carefully in her new blue dress, the nicest thing she'd ever owned, and pinned her hair up in an elaborate style. The children were scrubbed and dressed in their Sunday best. And Elias wore a suit Clara hadn't known he owned, looking almost unbearably handsome, with his hair neatly combed and his tie straight. They gathered in front of the house, and the photographer arranged them carefully. Elias sat in a chair with June on his lap. Henry stood behind his father's right shoulder, looking solemn and important. Lydia stood on the left, her hand on Elias's shoulder, and Clara stood beside Elias's chair, her hand resting on his other shoulder, the picture of a prosperous ranching family. "Perfect, Friar," the photographer declared. "Now everyone hold very still." As they waited for the exposure, Clara looked at her family because they were her family now, truly and completely, and felt overwhelming gratitude. This wasn't the life she'd imagined, but it was good. It was real. It was hers. When the photograph was developed weeks later, Clara had it framed and hung in the parlor. Visitors would see it and comment on what a handsome family the McCades made. And Clara would smile and agree and never tell them the complicated story of how this family came to be. Some things were private, the pain and fear and gradual healing that had transformed strangers into a unit. In October, Clara realized she'd missed her monthly courses. She waited another month to be sure, but when November came and went without them, she had to accept the truth. She was pregnant, carrying Elias's child, the final piece that would make her place in this family permanent and undeniable. She told him on a cold November evening, standing in the kitchen after the children had gone to bed. "Elias, I need to tell you something." He looked up from the ledger he'd been reviewing, immediately attentive. "What's wrong? You look pale." "Nothing's wrong. At least I don't think it's wrong." She twisted her hands together. "I'm going to have a baby. In the spring, I think." The ledger fell from Elias's hands, forgotten. He stood slowly, his expression unreadable. "You're certain?" "As certain as I can be without a doctor's confirmation." Clara held her breath, waiting for his reaction. They'd never discussed children of their own. The three they already had seemed like enough challenge. Elias crossed the space between them in 3 long strides and pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "A baby," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Our baby." "You're happy?" Clara asked, muffled against his chest. "Happy, Clara, I'm—" He pulled back to look at her, and she saw his eyes were wet. "I'm overwhelmed, terrified, grateful, excited. I'm everything all at once." He cupped her face in his hands. "When Sarah was expecting, I was young and stupid and took it for granted. But now I know how precious this is, how miraculous. You're giving me another chance at this, Clara, another chance to do it right." "We'll do it together," Clara said, "all of it. The fear and the joy and everything in between." The children took the news with varying degrees of understanding. Henry grasped immediately what it meant and seemed pleased at the prospect of another sibling. Lydia, now chattering almost constantly to make up for her months of silence, had 1,000 questions about babies and where they came from and how long they took to grow. And June, 3 years old and possessive, declared firmly that the baby was hers, and no one else could touch it. As winter settled over the ranch, Clara worked on preparing for the baby's arrival. She sewed tiny clothes and blankets, converted the smallest bedroom into a nursery, and tried not to think too hard about Sarah's death in childbirth. But one night, lying awake with Elias's hand resting protectively on her still flat stomach, fear got the better of her. "What if something goes wrong?" she whispered into the darkness. "What if I die like Sarah did? What if—" "Don't," Elias said fiercely, pulling her closer. "Don't think that way. We'll get Dr. Marsh from town. We'll have Ruth Brennan here to help. We'll do everything right." Sarah did everything right, Clara pointed out. It still took her. That was different. She was exhausted from having 3 babies in 6 years. Her body was worn down. "But you're young and healthy and strong, and I'm going to make sure you have everything you need, rest, good food, no heavy work. I'm not losing you, Clara. I can't. The children need you. I need you." Clara wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that wanting something badly enough could make it true, but she'd learned that life didn't work that way. Sometimes tragedy struck despite everyone's best efforts. Sometimes love wasn't enough to save someone. But she didn't voice these fears. Instead, she let Elias hold her and tried to focus on hope rather than terror. The winter was long and cold, but the household thrived despite the harsh weather. Clara's pregnancy progressed normally, her body gradually swelling with new life. Elias was attentive to the point of ridiculousness, insisting she rest constantly and refusing to let her do any heavy work. The children helped more, taking on tasks without complaint because Papa said Mama Clara needed to save her strength for the baby. In March, when the snow was beginning to melt and the first crocuses were pushing through the frozen ground, Clara's pains began. Elias sent Tom racing to town for Dr. Marsh and Ruth Brennan, then settled Clara in their room and tried to mask his terror with false calm. "You're going to be fine," he told her, gripping her hand. "You're strong. You can do this." "Tell the children I love them," Clara said suddenly, convinced she was going to die. "Tell them." "You're going to tell them yourself," Elias interrupted firmly. "You're going to live, Clara. You're going to meet our baby and watch it grow. I won't accept any other outcome." The labor was long and hard, but not as terrible as Clara had feared. Dr. Marsh arrived in time, competent and calm, and Ruth Brennan proved invaluable with her practical knowledge and soothing presence. And when dawn broke over the ranch, painting the snow-covered landscape in shades of gold and pink, Clara delivered a healthy baby girl with her father's gray eyes and a surprisingly loud cry. "You did it," Elias said, tears streaming down his face as he held his daughter for the first time. "You brilliant, brave woman. You did it." Clara, exhausted and overwhelmed, could only smile. She'd survived. They'd both survived. And looking at Elias cradling their tiny daughter with such wonder and love, she knew with absolute certainty that all of this, the struggle and fear and gradual healing, had been worth it. They named her Sarah Catherine Sarah for the woman who'd come before Catherine, for Clara's mother who'd taught her strength. It felt right to honor both women who'd shaped their family, to acknowledge the past while embracing the future. The children were instantly smitten. Henry held baby Sarah with surprising gentleness, his young face serious and awed. Lydia sang to her in a sweet, clear voice, songs she remembered from when she'd been little. And June, despite her earlier possessiveness, treated her baby sister with careful tenderness, bringing her favorite toys to share. They were a family complete and whole, built from loss and necessity, and gradually miraculously transformed into something chosen, something loved. On a warm evening in May, when baby Sarah was 6 weeks old and the ranch was bursting with new life, foals and calves, and the garden Clara had planted, the entire family gathered on the porch. Elias held his infant daughter while his older children played in the yard, their laughter ringing across the land. Clara sat beside her husband, her hand in his, watching the children and feeling peace settle over her like a blessing. "I never thought I could be this happy again," Elias said quietly. "After Sarah died, I thought that part of my life was over, that I'd spend the rest of my years just surviving, getting through each day. But you changed that. You brought joy back, light back." "We changed it together," Clara corrected. "You let me in. You were willing to try. That takes courage." "Do you ever regret it?" Elias asked. "Coming here. Giving up the life you might have had." Clara thought about the question seriously. Did she regret it? She'd lost her choices, her independence, her carefully planned future, but she'd gained a husband. She loved children who called her mama a home that was truly hers. She'd gained purpose and connection and a life that mattered. "No," she said finally. "I don't regret it. This wasn't the life I imagined, but it's better than anything I could have dreamed up on my own. Sometimes the path you never wanted becomes the one you were always meant to walk." Elias leaned over and kissed her soft and sweet, a gesture of love that had become as natural as breathing. "I love you, Clara McCade. Thank you for taking a chance on a broken man with 3 children and a head full of grief. Thank you for staying, for trying, for loving us even when we didn't make it easy." "I love you too," Clara said. "All of you. My whole complicated, beautiful, unexpected family." They sat together as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple and pink, watching their children play and their ranch thrive. In town, people would talk about them, the arranged marriage that shocked everyone by actually working, the young wife who'd won over the grieving widower the family built from necessity that had somehow become genuine. But Clara didn't care what people said. She knew the truth of her life, the reality of what they'd built together. It hadn't been easy. There had been pain and fear and moments when she doubted everything, but they'd persevered. They'd chosen each other day after day, building something real from imperfect pieces. And now sitting on her porch with her husband beside her and her children's laughter filling the air. Clara understood what Ruth Brennan had tried to tell her months ago. Sometimes the life you never wanted becomes the life you were meant for. Sometimes an arrangement becomes a love story. Sometimes strangers become family, and business becomes a partnership, and obligation transforms into choice. The girl who'd been given away at 18, still a virgin, still terrified, still grieving for the future she'd lost. That girl was gone. In her place was a woman who'd chosen her life, who'd fought for her place, who'd turned an impossible situation into something beautiful and real and deeply, profoundly happy. What happened had shocked everyone, it was true, but not for the reasons they'd expected. People had anticipated failure, a young wife fleeing, children suffering, a household falling apart. Instead, they'd witnessed something else entirely. They'd watched two wounded people find healing in each other. They'd seen a family rise from ashes. They'd witnessed love growing in unexpected soil, taking root and flourishing despite all the odds against it. As darkness fell and stars began to emerge, Elias called the children inside for bed. They came reluctantly. Henry and Lydia protesting that it wasn't that late June, demanding just 5 more minutes. But eventually they trooped inside Clara, following with baby Sarah in her arms, and Elias brought up the rear, already thinking about the work tomorrow would bring. Inside the house was warm and bright, filled with the sounds of family children arguing good-naturedly about whose turn it was to choose the bedtime story, water running as someone washed up the creak of old floorboards under familiar feet. This was home. This was love. This was the life Clara had built piece by hard-won piece in a place she'd never chosen but had learned to cherish. And when the children were finally settled and the house was quiet, except for the soft breathing of sleeping babies, Clara lay in her husband's arms and felt gratitude wash over her. For this man who'd learned to love again. For these children who'd accepted her. For this life that had been forced upon her but had become against all odds exactly what she needed. "What are you thinking?" Elias asked, his hand tracing lazy patterns on her arm. "That I'm happy," Clara said simply. "That despite everything, all the fear and pain and impossibility, I'm genuinely, completely happy. And I never thought I'd be able to say that." "Neither did I," Elias admitted. "For a long time I thought happiness was something that happened to other people, something I'd lost my right to. But you gave it back to me, Clara. You and our life together. You gave me back hope." They held each other in the darkness, two people who'd found each other through the most unlikely circumstances, who'd built something beautiful from broken pieces, who'd proven that love could grow even in the most unexpected places. Outside, the Colorado wind whispered through the pines, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its pack, but inside all was peace. Clara closed her eyes and let herself drift towards sleep, secure in the knowledge that tomorrow would bring new challenges and new joys, but she would face them all with this family at her side. They were hers, and she was theirs, bound not just by law or obligation, but by genuine love and hard-won trust. The bargain her father had made trading his daughter to save his ranch had seemed like a tragedy at the time. And perhaps it had been for that frightened 18-year-old girl climbing into a wagon bound for an unknown future. But that tragedy had transformed into triumph. That girl had become a woman. That arrangement had become a marriage. And that impossible situation had become a love story that would be whispered about for years to come. Not because it was scandalous or dramatic or filled with grand romantic gestures, but because it was real. Because it showed that love could grow in the most unlikely soil. Because it proved that sometimes the life you never wanted could become the life you were meant for. And years later, when people asked Clara about her marriage, about how she'd ended up in Pine Ridge, married to a widower with 3 children, she would smile and give them the simplest possible answer. Sometimes she'd say, "The best things in life are the ones you never saw coming." It was the truth. All of it. Every beautiful, complicated, unexpected word.